Calgary, Canada, nicknamed Cowtown, is a sprawling cosmopolitan community that grew rich from its role in the Canadian oil industry. Although Calgary is both cutting-edge and modern, it is also Canada's #1 rodeo destination, and its deep-rooted agricultural history is where the name Cowtown originates. It is here, in the quiet southeastern suburb of Ogden, that we meet Lisa Mitchell. Lisa was born in 1981, and she was one of two sisters. While the girls were growing up, their mother, Peggy, took care of them both. She loved her daughters very much but also taught them to be independent. When Lisa was 4 years old, Peggy could already tell that her daughter would be unique. The girl was sociable, expressed her creativity through art and music. In high school, Lisa made many friends with whom she eventually formed a girl group. She graduated from high school with average grades but excelled in creative subjects such as art and music. After finishing school, Lisa held various positions at grocery stores and cafes, but above all, she wanted to work at various events, including concerts. This would give Lisa the opportunity to meet some of her favorite musicians. Soon, Lisa got a job at a private restaurant located in northeast Calgary. She liked the work and enjoyed the food there, but one of the sushi chefs particularly appreciated her presence. This man's name was Alan Schieback. Although Alan was actually shy and reserved, he managed to start a conversation with Lisa. From that moment, they began to grow closer. Initially, their relationship was happy, but there were also problems. Lisa's parents did not like Alan because they thought he spoiled her mood. Lisa was always a sociable, cheerful young girl who loved to take risks and express her emotions. In contrast, Alan was much more reserved, calculating, and suspicious of anything. Eventually, these differences created cracks in their relationship, and the situation became tense. After 5 years of living together, they eventually separated. Lisa started dating other men again, and although it seemed she had forgotten Alan, he could not say the same. Alan found it difficult to move on after their breakup, and so a few months later, he reappeared in Lisa's life, begging for a second chance. Lisa tried to forget him while dating again, but none of the men she met fulfilled her desires. So, when Alan presented her with an engagement ring right before her eyes, their relationship resumed quickly. However, despite the engagement, the quarrels also resumed. They decided to start a family. First, they had a son, and after 2 years, a daughter arrived. They tried their best to make their children happy, but they themselves had a hard time. Alan worked during the day while Lisa stayed home with the children, and in the evenings, after dinner, the spouses would switch places. This way of life began to strain them both. Fatigue accumulated, and the changing work schedules took away the time that they could spend together. Often, the time they did find led to arguments, which became increasingly heated and fierce, eventually escalating into physical confrontations. Alan and Lisa went so far as to pinch, slap each other. After 10 years of marriage and 2 children, they both felt they had no other choice but to try to improve their relationship. It seemed better to break up and seek new happiness. Lisa's wise mother thought the same. She often urged her daughter to end things with Alan and return home, where she would always be there to offer her support. In recent years, Lisa and Peggy had become very close, not only in relationship but also due to distance. In 2011, when Lisa got a second job at the Longview Hotel, only an hour's drive from her mother's house, the reason was that Alan had lost his job again, and Lisa often had to work overtime to make ends meet. This, of course, caused tension between the spouses. While Alan often stayed home with the kids, Lisa frequently stayed with her mother to have time and perhaps take a break from Alan. In October, at the hotel, there was an event in honor of Halloween, and Lisa was among the invitees. She agreed to go, taking her mother with her. Since Lisa had work the next day, she decided to spend the night at her mother's house. They had a great time at the party, and everything went smoothly. The next morning, on October 29, 2012, Peggy hugged her daughter before taking her to work, but from that moment on, everything would change. Despite sending numerous messages, Peggy did not receive a response from Lisa for several days, which was unusual since Lisa always replied promptly. After checking on some information, Peggy found out that Lisa had stopped showing up at work. After that day, calls to Lisa and her family went unanswered. No one read her messages. Peggy began to worry seriously and decided to visit the Shyback residence. As she approached the front door, she knocked, not knowing who would answer. Later, Peggy said that Alan opened the door, and the first question she asked was, "Where is Lisa?" Alan replied that Lisa had left him. He claimed she ran away on Monday after an argument. He said that after they seemed to calm down, Lisa had sent him to buy cigarettes, and when he returned after 15 to 20 minutes, she was no longer at home. The conversation took place in the hallway. Looking to the right, Peggy noticed that Lisa's shoes and favorite jacket were still in the house. Since it was October, Peggy wondered where Lisa could have gone without dressing properly. She then told Alan that she wanted to see the rest of the house. As she walked through, she noted several of her daughter's personal belongings. However, she did not find Lisa's handbag, but she noticed that the jewelry Lisa always wore was still in its place. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Alan then claimed that after Lisa left, she had sent him an email. He asked Peggy to check her inbox, and indeed Lisa had written a letter to her mother. In this letter, she expressed how unhappy she was and that she needed to leave to clear her head. She wrote that they would soon contact each other more than once. There was something very strange about these letters. They were very different from her usual letters and lacked warmth and filled feelings. This time was tormenting for Peggy. She slept every night next to the phone in case her daughter called. Then, at 4:45 a.m. on November 16th, a very strange voice message was received. Peggy could not remember it word for word, but she realized that Lisa was fine. At the end of the voice message, Lisa said, "He is at home, I have to go." Peggy was confused. Who is at home? Where to go? She wondered if there was someone next to Lisa controlling her or if she was chained in a basement. This mysterious message prompted Peggy to decide to contact the police and initiate an investigation into the disappearance of Lisa Mitchell. The police first questioned those who had last seen Lisa and also visited the house where she lived. However, they did not find anything unusual there. The house was clean and tidy, except for the basement, which, like all basements, was full of junk. Checking the bank history and phone activity was unsuccessful. Lisa had not called or sent messages, and her funds on the cards had not been used since her disappearance. The case was treated as a missing persons case, and progress was slow. However, after more than 1 year, 3 months after Lisa's disappearance, Alan was finally interviewed by authorities to learn more about his relationship with his wife. He revealed that his relationship with Lisa had been rocky for the past decade. Alan also stated that his wife had dated other men while they were still living together and that he had found her profile on several dating sites. The information Alan provided was helpful to the police, but he still remained a suspect. Alan said that he had not heard from Lisa for several months. There is an expression that when a person disappears, their silence can be the loudest thing imaginable. As the investigation into Lisa's disappearance was delayed, the authorities decided to take extreme measures. Very rarely do people voluntarily remain missing for so long, and the police understood this. In connection with the change in local privacy laws, the police received the right to search for missing persons and study accounts, phone records. They were able to analyze the voice message that Lisa left for her mother a year ago. The phone from which the voice message was sent was traced back to Alan's number. Interestingly, Alan told the police that he had not heard from Lisa since she disappeared in October 2012, changing the authorities' view of him. Now that the case had become a criminal investigation, investigators were allowed access to all of his information, including his bank records. What they found was disturbing. It was revealed that back in 2012, Alan had made a rather strange purchase. He had gone to a local hardware store to buy gloves, bleach, a large plastic tub, a body mat, road salt, a wooden board, and concrete, items that the police would call a burial kit. The officers were troubled by this, but despite this evidence, the authorities felt it was not enough to arrest Alan. They needed something more, perhaps a confession. Based on this idea, a project called Aurora was created. It was a special operation aimed at achieving an eventual confession, and there was no easier way than through friendship. On December 4, 2013, a Thursday with temperatures well below zero, visibility in the area was quite good. That is why it was a real shock for Alan when a young woman crashed into his car in the parking lot of his workplace. She approached him to apologize, stating that it was an accident and that she would be happy to share her contact details to sort out the insurance. At first, Alan seemed unhappy, but eventually, he accepted the offer. Unknown to Alan, the woman was actually an undercover police officer. She told Alan that her boss would pay for any damage. That boss was also an undercover officer. The operation officially began. Several undercover officers were involved in maintaining the artificial friendship between Alan and his new friend. For instance, some female officers pretended to be nannies. They managed to become friends with Alan, who became so close to some of these imaginary friends that he even invited them out for drinks and to events. As for the first female officer, he politely invited her on a date, to which she, of course, gently declined. All these police officers slowly but surely approached Alan and his secrets in the hope that over time, they would obtain some kind of confession from him. To their credit, they had all been working for about a year, and their efforts were finally rewarded in December 2014 when a breakthrough was made. Feeling confident that a strong enough connection had been established between them and Alan, a plan was enacted to elicit the long-awaited confession. One of the officers arranged a trip by train to Winnipeg, which is more than 130 miles from Alan's home. As they were driving in Alan's car, a phone rang. It was the officer calling from the station to inform Alan that the status of Lisa's case had changed. Authorities now believed they were dealing with a murder, and officers were coming to his residence to search the house. On December 5, 2014, almost all the details of Lisa's disappearance finally became known. Alan, who was riding in the car with an undercover officer, said that he was in trouble, without going into details. The officer offered to help Alan and his children disappear, putting Alan in touch with a man who promised to assist him. This man was also an undercover officer. While the meeting was taking place, the police were already conducting a search at Alan's place. Unfortunately, they soon made a tragic and horrifying discovery in the basement of the family home. In the farthest corner of the house, cluttered with all sorts of junk, police found the remains of Lisa, crudely cemented and buried with a plastic bag. Her body was covered in cat litter and salt, indicating that the body had not decomposed naturally. Lisa's remains were partially mummified. Unfortunately, Alan had killed his wife, the mother of his children, and then hidden her under the house, where he continued to live upstairs for 26 months with his 2 children. During his meeting with the undercover officer, who promised to help Alan disappear, he felt compelled to explain why he needed to hide. He said that he and Lisa had a difficult relationship. They argued and then tried to make peace. He could not even remember what the argument was about that evening. When they went to sleep separately, he saw that Lisa had come to his bed, and he did not know what she wanted. He raised his hand and began to strangle her. He remembered holding the body while Lisa was convulsing. He then thought he needed to send a few text messages and emails to make people believe she had voluntarily disappeared. Afterward, he cleaned the scene of Lisa's death with bleach 2 or 3 times to ensure that no trace was left. There are several details in this case that indicate Alan was not the smartest of criminals, but one of his plans to cover up the crime was quite complex. He faked a voicemail that was supposedly left for Peggy by Lisa, stitching together several of Lisa's calls using a special program installed on her phone. Police found Alan searching online for body decomposition, salt, lime, concrete, lack of air, insects, between December 2012 and 2014, along with searches for Lisa Mitchell and murder laws. All this evidence, combined with Alan's candid conversation with the undercover officer, was enough for the officers to finally arrest him. He was charged with second-degree murder of Lisa Mitchell. It took more than 3 years to bring a case against Alan. The authorities should have taken his mental health into account, as it became known that he suffered from bipolar disorder. There was also a possibility that Alan acted in self-defense, as he claimed. In September 2017, Alan was finally brought to trial for Lisa's murder. The judge did not believe he had acted in self-defense, as the force he used against Lisa far outweighed any defensive actions. On the other hand, the judge did not believe that Alan had intended to kill his wife. In the end, he was not found guilty of second-degree murder. Instead, he was found guilty of the lesser crime of manslaughter, along with the abuse of a body. Alan Scheibach was sentenced to a short term of 7 years behind bars, though this term was later increased to 10 years. During his sentence, Alan was granted parole and was free for only 1 day. He grossly violated the rules of his freedom, and an excessive amount of medication for bipolar disorder was found in his home. However, Alan did not have to serve the full 10-year sentence and was released early. He is now a free man but is not allowed to contact Peggy or his children. Although Alan did not serve much of a prison sentence for Lisa's murder, he was given a strange punishment after discovering that most of his friends were undercover cops. This truth was deeply heartbreaking for him, and he would likely struggle with his issues for much of his life. Lisa's children live with their grandmother. Peggy says that in her grandchildren, she sees a lot of her daughter and is happy to watch them grow up. She describes her grandchildren as bright, outgoing, and cheerful, just like their mother was. It's hard to say what happened the night Lisa was killed. Was it self-defense or cold-blooded murder? The only thing we can be sure of is that Lisa was taken from this world too early. Described as a bright soul and caring daughter, she was also a loving, hard-working mother who held 2 jobs so that her children would have warmth and food. Unfortunately, her death means that her children are now left without a mother or father. The case of Lisa Mitchell is not only a heartbreaking story of loss but also a reminder of the complexities of family relationships and the consequences of unresolved conflicts. Lisa's life, though cut short, was marked by her love for her children, her creativity, and her relentless optimism. Although Alan paid the price for his actions, that punishment cannot erase the pain that Lisa's family, especially her mother, Peggy, and her 2 children, have endured. Peggy now serves as a rock for her grandchildren, nurturing them with love and hope, just as Lisa did. The story ends on a sad note, but it also affirms that, although Lisa is no longer with us, her light continues to shine through the people she loved and the memories she left behind. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Raymond Wright. On January 11, 2018, in Sacramento, California, Dean Wright grew increasingly anxious as he waited for his brother. They had planned to meet earlier that day, but Dean was unable to reach Raymond. The brothers were close, talking every day and maintaining a strong relationship. But suddenly, Raymond disappeared without a trace. There were no calls, no texts, and no activity on social media. He stopped posting photos, stopped visiting his personal page, and stopped answering the phone. Raymond, a 55-year-old carpenter, owned his own workshop and was known for being skilled at managing his business. Occasionally, he would drop off the radar, but never for more than half a day, usually due to work-related matters. This time, however, Raymond had been missing for an entire day, leaving his close friends and family deeply concerned. His sister called Dean, asking if he knew where Raymond was. Raymond's 2 daughters were also worried. They had noticed their father's unusually long absence and contacted Dean to share their concerns. The girls said they had tried calling their father all day, but their calls kept going to voicemail. Dean, growing increasingly worried, repeatedly called Raymond's number but had no success. That evening, he decided to visit Raymond's home in a suburb of Sacramento. Raymond also rented a nearby woodworking shop, which was doing well. Unfortunately, Dean found no sign of his brother in either the house or the shop. There were no indications of forced entry or robbery. Dean, who was familiar with both the house and the shop, carefully inspected the premises but found nothing unusual or any clues about Raymond's whereabouts. To add to the mystery, Raymond's pickup truck was also missing. At this point, Dean began to panic. Raymond had disappeared without any notice or plans to leave, leaving his family at a loss as to where to look. The situation left everyone worried, including Raymond's ex-wife. She and Raymond got married in June 1994. For many years, they tried to build a happy family. However, after some time living together, their differences in life views began to cause problems. Raymond was busy setting up a business, which made him completely absorbed in work and often neglectful of his daily family life. In 2001, the couple divorced. The children stayed with their mother, but Raymond remained actively involved in raising them and often visited them. After the divorce, Raymond stayed single for many years, avoiding the idea of starting a new family due to his heavy workload. In 2009, he remarried, but this marriage did not last long and ended in divorce that same year. According to relatives and friends, Raymond became extremely depressed because he was unable to maintain a personal life, largely due to his work addiction. This eventually led him to turn to alcohol. He had struggled with drinking since his early 20s but had quit when he first got married, maintaining a sober lifestyle for many years. Both his first and second wives confirmed that he had abstained from alcohol throughout their marriages. His second divorce had a profound impact on him, causing his life to spiral out of control. Struggling to cope, Raymond turned to heavy drinking, which led to serious problems. Although he was never aggressive or short-tempered, alcohol made him stubborn and reckless. In November 2011, after drinking heavily, he decided to drive under the influence. He lost control of his vehicle and caused an accident. The drivers and passengers in the other car involved were injured and filed a lawsuit against him for drunk driving. As a result, Raymond was sentenced to 18 months of probation and required to pay a substantial fine. This incident served as a wake-up call for him, and he immediately quit drinking. Determined to change, he joined Alcoholics Anonymous and attended daily meetings, fully committing to overcoming his addiction. During this time, his family and friends stood by him, offering their unwavering support. They noticed significant improvements in his behavior and overall health. It seemed as though he had found a new purpose in life, eager to make up for the time he had lost with his loved ones due to his struggle with addiction. From then on, he stopped drinking and started spending more time with his family. He even made a beautiful baby crib in his woodworking shop for his niece. He planned to spend the holidays with his family. Unfortunately, his loved ones would not have the opportunity to go on vacation with him. On January 11, 2018, Raymond disappeared without a trace. His family still has no idea where he is. When Dean visited his brother's house for the second time on January 13, 2018, he noticed a strange smell as soon as he entered. Even when Raymond was around, he had never supported smoking illegal substances. Suddenly, from the darkness of the room, a strange man emerged and confronted Dean, attempting to chase him away. After realizing Dean had no intention of leaving, the stranger ran out the back door and escaped. Confused by the incident, Dean called 911. A few minutes later, the police arrived at the scene. After conducting a thorough search of Raymond's home, the only evidence they found was a cup filled with ice and soda, complete with a lid and straw. This clue would later become crucial to the investigation. The encounter was so sudden and suspicious that the police quickly began to suspect a connection between the stranger's escape and Raymond's disappearance. Friends described Raymond as a creative and kind person. After overcoming his struggles with alcohol, his positive traits became even more prominent. No one believed he would abandon his family, especially after becoming a grandfather, a moment that brought him immense joy and happiness. Raymond was known for being uncontroversial, even during his struggles with addiction. Following this strange encounter, Dean's anxiety increased. He had never met the man before, and the stranger immediately became the prime suspect in Raymond's mysterious disappearance. However, the police had no clue as to the man's whereabouts. Raymond was officially listed as missing, and a search was launched to find him. Police speculated that he might have relapsed and resumed drinking. However, Raymond was known as one of the most determined members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He attended meetings not to seek support but to inspire others, proving that it was possible to give up alcohol completely and live a full life, even after years of heavy drinking. Police found no trace of alcohol in Raymond's home. They checked his bank card transactions, mobile phone records, and vehicle registration database but found no activity. It was as if he had vanished. None of his acquaintances had seen him during this time. A search of the house was conducted, and volunteers joined the effort, distributing flyers with Raymond's photo and details of his car. Police also sought help from the public through the media, but no information emerged. To gather more details from Dean, the police created a composite sketch of the stranger seen in Raymond's house. Unfortunately, the sketch did not produce any matches in the database. Likewise, fingerprints and DNA collected from the cup and straw did not yield any results, as they were not in the police database. After a week of unsuccessful searching, police finally located a 2016 white Ford F-250 owned by Raymond. The vehicle was found abandoned on January 21 in the North Highlands neighborhood, an area known for its high crime rate. The location was concerning because Raymond had no known connections or business in the area, making it unlikely he would have gone there willingly. The pickup truck's license plate had been removed, but Dean identified the vehicle based on its description during the search. Forensic experts determined that the vehicle had been broken into, with the doors left ajar. These findings led police to believe that something bad had happened to Raymond. After the police impounded the car, they requested assistance from the FBI. FBI agents arrived to inspect the vehicle and used advanced techniques to search for evidence, including fingerprints that might identify a potential suspect. During the inspection, they discovered faint, dark red stains on the car's carpet. Tests confirmed that the substance was human blood. To obtain a sample of Raymond's DNA, the police retrieved a toothbrush from his home. After comparing the collected materials, they determined that the blood in the car belonged to Raymond. Although the discovery was confirmed, no evidence linking the blood to a suspect was found. The investigation continued for 2 weeks, seemingly reaching a dead end. However, an unexpected event occurred that dramatically changed the case. On January 27, 2018, an unidentified vehicle sped through Sacramento at an extremely high speed. Police pursued the car but struggled to keep up as the driver reached speeds of 200 kilometers per hour, violating multiple traffic laws and endangering lives. The chase ended abruptly when the driver crashed head-on into an oncoming vehicle at high speed. Fortunately, the other driver survived, though he was pinned by the metal inside his car. He suffered only a broken leg and minor injuries. At the time, the officers had no idea how dangerous the man they had arrested truly was. The California Highway Patrol apprehended the reckless driver, who was intoxicated at the time of the incident. The man was identified as Victor Merle Gray, an individual with a troubled legal history. He was already wanted for a misdemeanor, and now a DUI charge was added to his record. His actions had clearly endangered lives, making him a significant threat. Victor was taken to the hospital for treatment under police guard and was later transferred to the Sacramento County Jail. As police delved deeper into Victor's background, they grew increasingly suspicious. It was discovered that the car he had been driving was stolen, and the license plate did not match the vehicle's registration. A database check of the license plate revealed it belonged to a 2016 Ford, the same car recently found in a crime-ridden area of the city. That car was registered to a missing person named Raymond. From that point on, Victor became the prime suspect in Raymond's disappearance. More evidence was needed to establish Victor's involvement. Unfortunately, because the police were not immediately focused on pressing Victor for information, progress stalled. He continued to fabricate stories and insisted that he had no knowledge of Raymond or how Raymond's license plate ended up on his car. For 3 months, he refused to confess until a significant breakthrough occurred. In April, DNA analysis of a straw found in a soda cup at Raymond's home matched Victor's DNA, confirming that he had indeed been in Raymond's house. Furthermore, Raymond's younger brother, Dean Wright, also identified Victor. However, this evidence was still insufficient to file formal charges. The mystery of what happened to Raymond remained unsolved. Key evidence was hidden in the car Victor had crashed. On May 8, 2018, police searched the wreckage and discovered important items that shed light on Raymond's disappearance. Amid the clutter inside the car, they found a man's hat. Dean recognized the hat and confirmed it was identical to the one Raymond had worn. Raymond's wallet and glasses were also found in the car, along with a broken cell phone that appeared to have been intentionally destroyed. However, the serial number confirmed that the phone belonged to Raymond. More important evidence was collected from Victor's cell phone. At the end of the tense chase, the phone had been thrown deep into the car's cabin and was only discovered later. On the phone, there were photos of a location that had been sent to someone named Bob. These photos were taken on January 27, the same day as the police chase. In the messages, Victor expressed grievances and complaints directed at Bob. At the end of the messages, he stated that it was time to pay his debt and that he was expecting his money. A detailed analysis of Victor's phone also uncovered a conversation with a woman named Katie Bernard, who lived in a trailer near Raymond's carpentry shop. Victor had a brief conversation with her, trying to determine whether Raymond was alone in his shop or with someone else. It was clear that Victor knew Raymond. This conversation took place in the early morning of January 11, 2018. Geolocation data showed that Victor was only a few dozen meters away from Raymond's workshop at the time. Based on the messages, it appears that he was observing the workshop from outside. Victor contacted Katie to confirm whether Raymond was in the workshop during working hours. Katie left her house and went to see Raymond, exchanging a few words with him. She then confirmed that he was alone in the carpentry workshop. After returning home, she informed Victor that Raymond was indeed alone in the workshop. It is believed that after Katie provided this information, Victor acted and attacked Raymond just before 10 a.m. Police began to suspect that Katie might be an accomplice in the case. She was brought in for questioning in October 2018. The police immediately pressured her, as her correspondence with Victor was clear evidence of her involvement. Under pressure, Katie quickly confessed. Katie admitted that she had informed Victor that Raymond was in the workshop, but she was initially reluctant to assist in the investigation. Despite her reluctance, she became a key witness in solving the mystery of Raymond's disappearance. When asked about Bob, who was mentioned in Victor's messages, Katie revealed that he was Robert Manor, her ex-boyfriend, who was also in a relationship with Raymond. However, their relationship was far from friendly. In 2011, Raymond had been driving drunk and caused a car accident with an oncoming vehicle carrying Robert and his wife. The accident left Robert with a broken leg, requiring serious surgery. Even after treatment, Robert continued to limp and suffered from constant pain. Additionally, Robert was unhappy with the compensation he received for the accident. After the trial, Raymond was ordered to pay $275,000 in damages, but he was unable to pay the full amount at once. Raymond made monthly payments, often late, and never remitted large sums. The situation became more complicated when police ran a background check on Robert in their database. He had an extensive criminal record at the time of the incident. His primary activity was drug trafficking, which had landed him in prison on multiple occasions. Robert also had convictions for armed assault and robbery. He was clearly frustrated with Raymond's behavior and had long plotted revenge against him, whom he blamed for all the problems in his life. The constant pain he experienced served as a reminder of the accident, and his hatred and anger only grew over time. This eventually led to a carefully planned act of revenge. Katie explains that after becoming an informant for Victor, she discovered that the situation involved more than just a stolen car. She claims that she was unwittingly involved in Raymond's kidnapping and, out of fear of becoming the next target, chose to remain silent. Katie hesitantly reveals that Victor confided in her about what happened at the carpentry shop. After exchanging text messages with her, Victor armed himself and went to the shop. There, he struck Raymond on the head, knocking him unconscious. Victor then tied Raymond's hands and stuffed him into a pickup truck. He calmly drove through town to his house, located a few miles away. When Katie asked if he had killed Raymond, Victor grabbed her by the neck and warned her never to reveal their conversation. He threatened her but never disclosed what happened to Raymond. During the investigation, it was discovered that Katie was Robert's girlfriend. She was terrified of him, which made it difficult for the police to get her to talk. She knew he was dangerous and feared retaliation. Eventually, she admitted that she knew what had happened. However, Robert avoided providing details, saying only that he had taken care of everything he needed to do a long time ago. The police's main challenge was locating Raymond. Despite their best efforts, he was never found. In March 2021, Victor and Robert were charged with kidnapping and murder. However, both Victor and Robert denied any involvement in Raymond's case. They knew that admitting guilt would result in a life sentence without parole. Their lawyers argued that, since Raymond's body was never found and the case was based on circumstantial evidence, Victor and Robert could not be convicted of murder. The absence of a body allowed Victor and Robert to avoid punishment. From the start, the prosecutor's office faced several challenges, one of which was the credibility of the witnesses. Most of them had histories of drug use or legal trouble, which made their testimony questionable. Victor later admitted to kidnapping Raymond and handing him over to Robert but denied committing the murder. He revealed that his actions were motivated by a lack of payment. Victor claimed that Robert owed him $10,000 in cash for the job, but the money was never paid. The day Victor was being chased by the police for reckless driving, he drove a car full of evidence to confront Robert for cheating on him. Had Victor been paid, the confrontation might never have happened, and the criminals might have evaded justice. The trial began in March 2023, more than 5 years after Raymond went missing. Despite years of investigation, Raymond's body was never found. This made the trial particularly challenging, as proving guilt without a body was difficult for the prosecution. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys employed several strategies to influence the case. However, the prosecution had a key advantage: Katie Bernard, who agreed to testify against Robert and Victor in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Katie was not charged but played a key role in the case by providing a significant amount of incriminating evidence against Victor and Robert. Victor's confession was also crucial, as it revealed Robert's direct involvement in Raymond's disappearance and possible murder. Defense attorneys highlighted the lack of physical evidence, particularly the absence of a body. The trial lasted 1 day, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours before delivering its verdict on March 17, 2023. Both Victor Merle Gray and Robert Manor were convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Victor refused to address the press, Robert immediately denounced the verdict as a miscarriage of justice. To this day, Robert maintains his innocence, accusing Victor and Katie of conspiring to frame him. However, prosecutors dismissed this claim as false, arguing that only Robert had a motive for revenge. Victor had never met Raymond and thus had no reason to harm him. Raymond Wright's body has never been found, leaving his grieving family unable to give him a proper burial. Despite the tragedy, Raymond's daughters have shown resilience. Though deeply affected by the loss of their father, they have worked hard to rebuild their lives. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Natalie Henderson. In 2016, Natalie Henderson celebrated her 17th birthday. She lived in Roswell, while her friend Carter Davis, also 17, was from nearby Woodstock. Although they both attended high school, they attended different schools. For 3 years, Natalie was part of the custodial team at her school, motivated by her aspirations of becoming a lifeguard. Friends described Natalie as cheerful, outgoing, engaging, and confident. She was an active young woman who loved to sing and play the guitar, and she spent hundreds of hours volunteering to help animals. Carter Davis volunteered at a local animal shelter and was a member of both the football and lacrosse teams at his school. Coaches often praised his athletic abilities and encouraged him to play in college. With his energetic and cheerful personality, he was known for always smiling and encouraging his teammates, especially when they faced challenges. Both teenagers had promising futures ahead of them, but tragically, their lives came to an abrupt end one day. At around 6 a.m. on Monday, August 1, 2016, a delivery driver arrived at a supermarket to unload his groceries. However, he noticed something unusual. To reach the unloading area, he had to go around two cars parked oddly in the square, which was strange, as there had never been any cars or strangers there before. As he approached, he saw two bodies lying motionless on the pavement, surrounded by blood. Panicked, he immediately called emergency services. When the police arrived, they quickly identified the victims as 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and her friend Carter Davis. Both had been shot in the head, and Natalie was found wearing nothing, raising suspicions that she may have been abused. The crime scene indicated a homicide, with no signs of a struggle or weapons nearby. It appeared that the young victims had been shot unexpectedly. The area was secured, and forensic experts began their investigation. The teens were due to return to school in just over a month. However, instead of focusing on their senior year, their parents had to prepare for their funerals. Both schools that Natalie and Carter attended announced a day of mourning and held a fundraiser to support their families. The news of their deaths shocked everyone who knew them, as well as the residents of this quiet town. Natalie and Carter were active, friendly young people who volunteered and participated in sports. They had no known enemies or critics. On the day the bodies were found, 2 candlelight vigils were held in loving memory of the deceased, with hopes that the police would quickly apprehend the person responsible for such a horrific act. In their grief, the city's residents were in a state of panic. They did not know what to think or whether a dangerous criminal could strike again. The media circulated rumors and inaccurate information from the police, which only added to the public's anxiety. The police concluded that Natalie and Carter had been in a secluded area behind the supermarket between 2 and 3 a.m., just hours before their bodies were discovered by a motorist. The condition of the bodies and initial signs from the autopsy supported this time frame. Their parents believed the young couple had been home and asleep, raising the question of why they were in that area so late at night. After interviewing Natalie and Carter's friends, the police learned that they had run away to meet each other. They had been in a relationship but kept it a secret because they feared their families would disapprove due to their young age. As a result, they would meet in isolated locations in the evenings and at night. A witness who had passed by the supermarket about 30 minutes before the bodies were found reported that he had not noticed anything unusual at the time. He did not provide specific details and admitted that he may have missed important information due to the darkness. To gather more information, he contacted the public. The most interesting point was the time between 2 and 3 in the morning, which could greatly assist the investigation. Surveillance camera footage from the crime scene was available, with several recordings made at the same time. The area is usually busy only during business hours, and there is very little activity at night. It was clear that the video cameras were essential for safety, as the isolated and dark street was an ideal location for crime. The police noted that the location could attract young people, and nearby 24-hour restaurants were also considered potential meeting places. Several popular establishments were in the vicinity, including a well-known steakhouse. The police requested footage from these restaurants and began analyzing the recordings. However, they were unable to find any teenagers in the footage from inside these establishments. This suggests that Natalie and Carter were not there to eat but simply to spend some private time together. They posed no threat to anyone and were in a secluded area. Therefore, they may have been victims of random violence or involved in something more sinister. The family stated that the victims had no legal problems and were not involved in any suspicious groups related to alcohol or illegal drugs. They were not engaged in any business activities, and Natalie even volunteered to help teenagers struggling with addiction. The police were certain that the victims were not killed elsewhere, as they found no evidence that they had been dragged or transported in a vehicle. Initially, the police focused on drugs as a possible motive. This idea gained public support because the abandoned area around the supermarket appeared to be a hotbed of illegal activity. However, after 2 days, this theory was dismissed. Surveillance footage from the supermarket helped police identify the killer, described as a thin man with long, unkempt hair. Unfortunately, the footage did not capture his face or license plate number. However, the police were able to identify the suspect before Natalie and Carter's funerals. Police investigated and found that the suspect had used Natalie's debit card at a store near her home and at a gas station. Surveillance cameras captured him, and his cell phone's geolocation data was examined. He was actually near the supermarket at the time of the double murder. Police identified and arrested the suspect, 20-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood, just a few miles from the crime scene. Initially, police were unsure of Jeffrey's motives, but they believed he acted alone. Multiple government agencies, including the FBI, were involved in the investigation. At around 5 a.m., police arrested Jeffrey at a gas station without any resistance. At the time, Jeffrey lived with his maternal grandparents, who adopted him when he was very young. Little is known about him, making it important to understand what might have driven him to kill Natalie and Carter. He was found to be an active social media user, with police and psychologists noting signs of internal struggles in his posts. The evening before the double murder, he shared a caption photo that read, "Always remember that you are unique, completely unique like everyone else." Some of his posts also contained darker themes and expressed thoughts of ending his life. Jeffrey's grandparents mentioned that he had been in legal trouble for years. A year earlier, he had been sent to a special academy for troubled youth due to his criminal activities. He was involved in a gang, and his grandparents reported that Jeffrey sometimes acted out to the point where they feared for their safety. Jeffrey's mother had separated from his biological father before he was born. During her pregnancy, she used illegal drugs, which negatively affected Jeffrey. From the beginning, she paid little attention to him and essentially abandoned him. As a result, he was sent to live with his grandparents, who lived near the site of the double murder. They were very religious and cared for Jeffrey as best they could, but he did not behave like a devoted grandson. Jeffrey's mother was ordered to pay $40 a week in child support, but she skipped the payments. This led her parents to take legal action, claiming that she owed over $12,000 in child support when Jeffrey was only 9 years old. Eventually, Jeffrey's mother began to care for her son and visited him twice a month. They attempted to set up a time to meet to help her learn how to care for a child, hoping to reunite and allow her to take on a more active parenting role in the future. However, according to Jeffrey's grandparents, he continued to have ongoing problems. In March 2011, Jeffrey failed to report to the police when he was under supervision. His maternal grandparents provided police with a note from Jeffrey stating that he planned to go into the wilderness to survive for a few days. However, he was carrying a 9mm pistol. After a few months, the police decided not to pursue the case further. Eventually, another family conflict arose. Jeffrey ran away again after several days of inappropriate behavior. After his arrest, he promised to behave, but a few months later, he was reported again for swinging a sword in his yard. When the police arrived, Jeffrey explained that he was practicing karate and was doing so outside behind a fence to avoid hurting anyone. However, his maternal grandparents told the police that Jeffrey was behaving inappropriately and posed a danger. Unfortunately, there was still no way to prove any malicious intent. In April 2013, Jeffrey's grandmother contacted the police again, reporting that about 6 weeks earlier, Jeffrey had threatened to blow up a building. Initially, the police did not take these threats seriously, but it soon became clear that the boy was preparing for something. Jeffrey's grandmother became suspicious when she discovered a sword and several knives on him. In February 2015, Jeffrey was charged with weapon theft. It is important to note that until the end, Jeffrey had not shown any aggression toward others and had not harmed his grandparents or strangers. Therefore, the violent actions that led to the deaths of Natalie and Carter shocked the boys' family. After the incident, one of Jeffrey's close friends spoke to the police, explaining that the boy was not a bad person by nature but had struggled with mental illness for many years. These mental health issues contributed to the tragic attack on the loving couple. Although Jeffrey was generally a caring and loving person, he changed dramatically when he began hearing voices in his head. Jeffrey often shared his struggles with a close friend. His issues began in elementary school and led to behavioral problems in high school. It got so bad that he was homeschooled and barely attended school during those years. About 4 months before the shooting, Jeffrey received a diagnosis indicating that he suffered from schizophrenia and other mental health issues. Although he had been on medication for a while, he stopped shortly before the incident, believing that he was getting better and no longer needed help. Sadly, he lost control, leading to the shooting of a stranger. The police worked tirelessly for nearly 2 days to gather details about the horrific crime. Their efforts led to charges being filed, and the trial began just 1 day after Jeffrey was arrested. The results of the forensic examination shed more light on the massacre. Forensic experts found no traces of male fluids on Natalie's body, but some of the injuries raised concerns about possible abuse. Natalie was shot at close range, while Carter was shot at medium range on the left side of the head. The murder weapon was never found. Before the hearing, Jeffrey claimed that he was not involved in the massacre but was merely a witness. He stated that he did not see the attacker but observed the events as they occurred. He mentioned that the girl was worth nothing when she got out of the car and that the attacker then killed them. After the shooting, the attacker took valuables from the car and the girl's purse. However, Jeffrey's testimony did not match the evidence, as surveillance camera footage revealed the actual details of the crime. Later, during a second interview, Jeffrey changed his story. He claimed that a stranger behind the supermarket was responsible. He alleged that this stranger threatened Natalie and Carter with a weapon and forced them out of the car. Jeffrey stated that he had a brief conversation with Carter before the shooting began. He claimed that the girl exited the car at the attacker's request, who then assaulted her on the hood before shooting her. However, this version was also deemed implausible, as police knew that no one else was involved. It was all Jeffrey himself, as shown in the video. During a third interview, Jeffrey confessed to the truth of the events. He admitted to committing all the crimes he had previously mentioned. New information came to light, indicating that he forced the couple out of the car while they were partially undressed. He shot Carter first, then forced Natalie to remove her shirt and underwear. He abused her on the hood of his car before killing her. According to him, he killed Carter first because he thought the young man was strong and capable of defending himself. It is unclear why Jeffrey committed the crime. He stated that he had moved out of his grandparents' house a few days earlier after being expelled from school due to his erratic behavior. He took his belongings, including the clothes he wore during the murder, which were later found hidden at his girlfriend's house, where he had been staying before the incident. Jeffrey's diary contained disturbing entries, including frightening thoughts about killing. His grandparents expressed fear for him. Just before the tragedy, he had mentioned end-life thoughts and a desire to harm others. Based on the evidence gathered, the prosecutor's office filed 12 charges against Jeffrey, including aggravated double murder, abuse, burglary, and illegal possession of a weapon. During the trial, Jeffrey appeared disheveled and unwell. His long hair partially obscured his face, and bystanders observed him mumbling to himself. His behavior became increasingly erratic, with footage showing him fondling an imaginary object on his leg. After a preliminary hearing, Jeffrey was denied bail. His attorney described him as extremely frightened and said he did not fully understand what was happening. The attorney, who took on the case pro bono, believes that everyone deserves legal representation. The defense focused primarily on Jeffrey's mental health, as independent experts had diagnosed him with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The preliminary hearing was originally scheduled for September 9 but was postponed to October 28. The prosecutor's office intends to pursue the death penalty for the double murder. When Jeffrey appeared in court, he reported that he had not been given his psychiatric medication while in prison. He claimed that he had repeatedly contacted the medical team for medication but had been ignored. The hearing was adjourned again, this time to February of the following year. While Jeffrey appeared unwell during the preliminary hearing, he told the jury otherwise. Jeffrey had been hearing voices for a long time. Some of these voices sounded like demons, while others sounded like friends. He believed he was receiving messages from God through the television and felt as though he was being watched through the walls. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a mental illness that includes symptoms of both schizophrenia and mood disorders, and usually appears during adolescence. Jeffrey also had a long history of mental health problems. In 2001, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. He struggled with anger management, which led to multiple hospitalizations in 2012 and 2013. With the help of appropriate medication, Jeffrey was able to appear in court and eventually grasp the proceedings. His doctor testified in court that Jeffrey experienced voices, hallucinations, and paranoia. Given the circumstances, Jeffrey pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that he was not in control of his actions when he attacked the two young men. The parents of the victims shared that even in their short lives, Natalie and Carter made a significant impact by dedicating their time to helping others, in stark contrast to their killer. While in prison awaiting trial, Jeffrey attempted to write letters of apology to the victims' families several times. However, he was only able to do so after his health improved with medication. The jury ultimately found him guilty, and Jeffrey Haywood received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of April Holt. By the summer of 2023, April Holt, a mother of two and a positive thinking coach, had gained over 200,000 followers on TikTok. She building her online reputation on optimism and stories of overcoming adversity. She often encouraged her followers with the mantra, "Keep growing, keep manifesting, and you will succeed." Tragically, at the end of July, April was discovered unconscious in her bathroom and passed away a few days later. While the police classified it as either an accident or self-harm, April's mother, Jamie, held a different belief and began advocating for justice. In early July 2023, April celebrated her 29th birthday, reflecting on her accomplishments at such a young age. As an independent eyelash extension technician, she had left her previous job to start her own business and work for herself. On her birthday, she expressed gratitude, stating, "Happy 29th birthday to me. I am so grateful for the opportunity to live another year, for 10,585 days of life." Among her many achievements, April cherished her family the most, especially her children. She was a devoted and loving mother, sharing snippets of their family life on TikTok. Her videos emphasized positivity, spiritual growth. She inspired her followers by saying, "Sending good energy to everyone who sees this. I wish you a productive day. Be goal-oriented and grow." Occasionally, her videos were simply light-hearted and entertaining. Over the years, April shared personal experiences, including her time as a homeschooled child, which left her with painful memories of social isolation that she eventually overcame. She and her husband, Donovan Holt, who was 33 years old, openly discussed the highs and lows of their marriage. They started as friends, then became best friends, lovers, and ultimately husband and wife, welcoming their daughter and son. Their relationship faced several challenges, such as a period of separation, financial struggles, depression, and serious health issues. Despite these obstacles, April always focused on the positives, portraying their journey as one of resilience and triumph through love. On the morning of July 28, April called her mother to confirm plans for a trip to see a movie, but the plans changed, and she suggested they meet at church the following day. Later that day, however, her mother received a call from Donovan, who reported that his son had found April unconscious in the bathroom. She had a plastic bag tightly wrapped around her head. April's mother, Jamie, noticed that Donovan was behaving oddly. He seemed to lack the deep sorrow and confusion expected from someone who had just lost a spouse. He allowed April's mother to make all decisions regarding her treatment while doctors worked to save her life. Meanwhile, Donovan sat with his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. After 3 days of fighting for her life, April did not regain consciousness and was declared dead by doctors on July 31st. An autopsy report released in November identified suffocation as the cause of death. However, the Nashville police found no evidence of foul play and classified her death as an accident. They informed Jamie that the case was closed, but Jamie refused to accept this conclusion. She vowed to continue investigating to uncover the truth. 2 weeks before her death, April had filed for divorce. This was not the first crisis in their marriage. The couple had previously faced difficulties and lived apart for several years. Although they had separated, they had not finalized their divorce. They maintained a friendly and warm image on social media, which may have been partly genuine, or perhaps they were caught in an unhealthy cycle, as they decided to give their relationship another chance after a long break. In their videos, they often spoke about the importance of forgiveness, open communication, and mutual support. However, the struggles in their marriage were never shared on their TikTok pages. After many years together, April was determined to leave Donovan this time and told her mother that she would not return to him. Donovan seemed to grasp the situation, as Jamie later discovered that a week before April's death, he pawned his wedding ring. There had been a fight between April and Donovan, but the specifics of the argument were unclear. Later, April's son told his grandmother about that tragic day, July 29th. He recalled that April woke up as usual, had coffee, wrote in her journal, enjoyed the calm of the morning, played with him, kissed both him and his father, and then went into the bathroom. He heard the argument escalate and pressed his ear to the bathroom door, noticing their feet beneath it. He tried to make sense of their words but couldn't hear anything, so he ran back to his room. After a while, his father came to him, dressed him, fed him, and told him to come when they called for the ambulance. April was taken to the hospital, but she was no longer breathing. The doctors informed the family that there was no blood circulation in her brain and that her brain was not functioning. On July 31st, 2023, April was declared dead, prompting Jamie to fight for justice and bring attention to the case from the Nashville Police and Prosecutor's Office. She launched her own campaign, reaching out to local news stations and celebrities while actively sharing updates on social media. This journey was challenging since the case had already been closed, making it difficult to attract media coverage. Despite major news outlets halting their reporting, Jamie persevered with her online campaign. Jamie obtained full access to the case and initiated her own investigation by filing a formal complaint with the Nashville Community Oversight Board. As a result, April's case was reviewed, and 4 months later, the Nashville police conducted a second investigation. Although this re-investigation did not alter the case classification or the official cause of April's death, it provided Jamie with valuable details to analyze. She meticulously studied the report day and night, searching for any clues. During this time, Jamie also focused on creating a stable and supportive environment for her grandchildren. Jamie openly discussed her pain and authored a book about her healing journey. Jamie became a strong advocate against domestic violence, highlighting how aggression can manifest in unexpected ways. After his wife's death, Donovan Holt moved to Texas and wanted his son to live with him. However, his son pleaded with his grandmother to allow him to stay, promising to do everything he could to remain by his grandmother's side. Jamie stressed that she does not influence her children's feelings and always aims to give them the freedom to choose where they want to be happy. She also wanted her grandchildren to stay together. Unfortunately, Jamie's relationship with her ex-son-in-law quickly deteriorated. In April 2024, she stopped posting about the case, explaining that she had been placed under a gag order. Despite this pause in her online advocacy, Jamie continued to seek justice for her daughter. Investigators initially stated that April had no visible injuries suggesting violence. However, Jamie observed significant bruises and marks on April's body while in the hospital, indicating otherwise. The autopsy report revealed marks on her neck, thighs, and ankles, along with a deep cut on the inner side of her thigh. Crucially, there was only one set of fingerprints found on the bag that was placed over April's head and on the tape that secured it. These fingerprints did not belong to April, they were identified as belonging to Donovan Holt. In September, Jamie confronted Donovan with the findings from her investigation. He admitted to committing the crime. Jamie wasn't shocked, she had known the truth. Following his confession, she took a recording of their conversation to the police, which led to the reopening of April's case. The previous conclusion was re-evaluated, and April's death was officially reclassified. On September 19, 2024, the police announced that Donovan Holt was arrested in San Antonio after confessing to a detective that he killed April Holt. A grand jury charged him with manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and perjury. He was moved from Texas to Nashville, where he was held on a $75,000 bond awaiting a hearing set for October 23. After discussions with the cold case investigation team in Nashville, all uncertainties regarding the case were clarified. Donovan Holt, 33, repeated to the police the same story he had told Jamie. During an argument, he choked April out of anger. To hide what he had done, he moved her to the shower, put a bag over her head, and secured it with tape. Then he went to make lunch for his son. It was only after his son finished eating that he asked their son to check on April and call for an ambulance. April's children are currently living with their grandmother, who reports that they are managing as best as they can, experiencing both difficult days and some slightly better ones. Jamie has expressed her gratitude to her social media followers for their support during this challenging time. Her struggle is far from over, as she is now working to upgrade the charges against Donovan from manslaughter to first-degree murder. With Donovan Holt awaiting trial, Jamie remains committed to seeking justice for her daughter. She insists that this case receives the attention it deserves until all facts and evidence are thoroughly examined, the crime against her daughter is fully understood. Her strength and relentless determination inspire those around her. Each day, more people are rallying to support Jamie, her grandchildren, including friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. On social media, in the news, and at public events, there is a growing conversation about the importance of speaking out and protecting loved ones. Jamie frequently shares her thoughts with her followers, emphasizing that her fight is not just for her daughter but for everyone who has suffered from cruelty and injustice. She hopes her story will resonate with other families who have experienced loss, highlight the importance of perseverance. April, Jamie believes, lives on in the hearts of her children and everyone she inspired with her positivity. Now, Jamie embodies this fight and shines as a light that cannot be dimmed. The day will come when Jamie, knowing that justice has prevailed. With deep sorrow for her child, Jamie will say, "You are not only my beloved daughter, you are a symbol of strength, resilience, and love. Your memory will continue to inspire others." Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Graziella Monsi. The Monsi family had an 8-year-old daughter named Graziella Monsi, their only child and a long-awaited member of the family. They are businessmen who cater to tourists and have owned a shop for about 10 years where they sell nuts and dried fruits on the street leading to Castel del Monte. Their shop's prime location brought them steady and substantial income. Despite her young age, Graziella often helped her parents with the business, which made the family proud. Since childhood, she had been involved in their work, bringing energy and enthusiasm to the shop. The location was a bustling tourist area with a constant flow of customers, and her help was invaluable during busy times. Her cheerful and active nature left a lasting impression on customers who shopped there. One Saturday, a peak day for tourists, the Monsi family was hard at work, as weekends were typically their busiest. Graziella's grandfather often helped behind the counter during such busy periods, and she eagerly accompanied him to run small errands. That day, a large number of people came to Castel del Monte, keeping her grandfather busy at the stall, unable to step away. By evening, he grew tired and asked Graziella to go to the nearby fountain to fill a bottle with water. She happily agreed and left for the fountain, just a 5-minute walk away. However, her grandfather soon began to worry when she didn't return promptly. Graziella's grandfather comforted himself by thinking she might have met someone she knew and gotten distracted. However, after more than 20 minutes had passed and she still hadn't returned, he realized something was wrong. Worried, he walked to the fountain to check what might have delayed her. He was astonished to find Graziella nowhere to be seen, either on the road or near the fountain. He searched all the nearby streets carefully but couldn't locate her. Her disappearance seemed suspicious. The grandfather went back to the shop, hoping she might have returned through a different route, but she wasn't there. Roughly half an hour after she vanished, he informed her parents. Together, they began calling her friends and acquaintances, hoping someone had seen her. Sadly, no one they contacted had any information. Meanwhile, Monsi's entire family and some close friends gathered at the square near the store and began organizing a search. Less than an hour after Graziella vanished, the adults and teenagers divided into groups to search for her. The commotion caught the attention of passers-by and some tourists, prompting several volunteers to join the search effort. The Monsi family carried a photo of Graziella, asking anyone they encountered if they had seen her. A few people mentioned seeing a girl who looked like her earlier in the afternoon, but nobody knew where she might be or what had happened. The area was typically peaceful and quiet, making it hard to imagine someone attacking a girl in such a bustling location. After searching unsuccessfully for a few hours, the Monsi family reported Graziella missing at the local police station. The police acted quickly, and soon, the Carabinieri were involved in the search. Later, a witness approached an officer with a disturbing claim. He had heard a child's panicked cry coming from the wooded area near Castel del Monte. 2 police officers immediately went to investigate the location. When they arrived at the forest, they saw smoke rising from a fire. At first, they didn't think it was connected to Graziella's disappearance, but they decided to investigate to better understand the situation. Suspecting it might be a forest fire, they approached cautiously. As they got closer, about 10 meters away, they were hit by a distinct and horrifying smell: burnt flesh. Soon, the officers discovered a fire pit in the woods. In the flames, there were dry leaves burning, and underneath was what looked like a human body. To their horror, the body was child-sized, and the clothing matched the description of the dress Graziella had been wearing that day. The police immediately suspected the remains were hers. The fire had completely consumed her body, and she was found deceased. The area was thoroughly searched, but apart from fragments of Graziella's clothing in a lighter, likely used to start the fire, no other evidence was found to identify the perpetrator. Investigators decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the area and aimed to collect surveillance footage from nearby cameras. A forensic expert later confirmed the grim discovery: the body was indeed Graziella's. An autopsy revealed that she had been deliberately murdered and burned. News of the incident spread quickly, making headlines the next day. Journalists flocked to Graziella's family, seeking comments on the tragic murder. When her relatives learned the full details of what had happened, they were in utter disbelief. They could not comprehend such a cruel and monstrous act. The entire community was deeply shaken. The media heightened public fear by extensively reporting on the horrific crime near the famous castle. This caused a sharp decline in tourist visits to the town, as people began to view the area as unsafe. The town's reputation as a popular destination suffered greatly, dealing a heavy blow to Andria's tourism industry. People are facing the tragedy and its lasting consequences. Meanwhile, investigators acted swiftly to find the perpetrator. From the very beginning, the police were determined to solve the case. Their primary theory was that a predator had enticed Graziella to leave the bustling tourist area and go to a more secluded location. There, he assaulted her and tried to cover up all evidence of the crime. Authorities initially believed that the attacker was likely an older, calculated, and experienced man. They began their investigation by reviewing a list of known criminals in the area who had criminal records related to abuse. However, as the case unfolded, this theory lost credibility. Investigators also considered the possibility that the perpetrator was a tourist who randomly targeted victims, including Graziella. To explore this, they analyzed tourist movements, but this idea also seemed increasingly improbable over time. As police interviewed witnesses, friends, and acquaintances of the Graziella family, one name kept coming up: Pasquale Tortora. He was a 20-year-old local man who worked illegally as a parking attendant on the same street as the Graziella family shop. Many people had noticed that since Graziella started working at the store, Pasquale had been observing her in a strange and unsettling way. Several individuals mentioned this, and their observations raised suspicions. When the police questioned Pasquale's friends, the concerns deepened. Some of his acquaintances had even joked that he seemed attracted to the 8-year-old girl. However, in the current situation, what had once been considered a harmless joke now carried a much darker implication. Could Pasquale have been a predator obsessed with Graziella? His family firmly denied this possibility, pointing out that he was raised in a respectable household and had no prior trouble with the law, at least, not until the tragic evening near Castel del Monte. However, despite his family's claims, Pasquale quickly became the main suspect. Investigators grew more suspicious after meeting with him. His t-shirt showed suspicious dark red stains, and his clothing was marked with dirt, as if he had been crawling or struggling on the ground. Additionally, his face bore small but clear scratches, resembling marks left by tiny hands in a desperate struggle. Pasquale, of course, denied any involvement in the attack on Graziella. However, during questioning by detectives, his testimony became increasingly inconsistent. He kept changing his story, which led investigators to suspect that he was hiding something. After just a few hours at the police station, Pasquale began to crumble under pressure. He then made a cold remark, stating that he found Graziella very beautiful, even though she was only 8 years old. Initially, he claimed that while walking in the woods, he stumbled upon Graziella's lifeless body already on fire. Frightened, he said he ran away, and the police showed up later. Later, he altered his story. He said he had seen Graziella heading to the fountain to fetch water. Since she knew him and trusted him, she wasn't afraid when he approached her. He emphasized that he had always acted calmly around her up to that point. Pasquale then mentioned that a dog had recently given birth to puppies in the nearby forest and claimed he had offered to show them to Graziella. This seemingly harmless excuse was the moment investigators grasped the horrifying reality of what had taken place. After breaking down completely, Pasquale confessed to his actions. He admitted to luring Graziella into the forest and, after committing the crime, setting her on fire to destroy any evidence. However, he denied intending to abuse her. Instead, he claimed his actions were part of a so-called Cato game, which had escalated beyond his control. The media quickly sensationalized the story, amplifying it with rumors and disturbing details. This overwhelming wave of coverage fueled public confusion. The true motive behind the murder remained unclear, as Pasquale's testimony was riddled with contradictions, leaving many questions unanswered. The police uncovered several inconsistencies in his account. His timeline didn't add up, and his explanations lacked credibility. One fact, however, was undeniable: the fire began around 10 p.m., but Graziella had already been missing for nearly 3 hours. So, what happened during that time frame? Later, Pasquale disclosed a chilling detail: he lit the fire after hearing people nearby in the forest. Believing they were searching for Graziella, he panicked and acted out of fear. However, The most horrifying discovery came from forensic experts. They concluded that she was still alive when the fire was set. Investigators continued to intensify their questioning of Pasquale. A troubling question emerged: how had he managed to commit such a horrific act while escaping with only minor injuries? Could he truly have acted alone? This led authorities to consider the possibility of an accomplice or even multiple accomplices, turning the focus of the investigation in a new direction. The police decided to interrogate Pasquale again. Eventually, he agreed to cooperate, admitting that fear had previously stopped him from revealing the entire truth. In his revised statement, Pasquale claimed that he never intended to harm Graziella himself. Instead, he stated that a group of young men, all aged 18 to 20, had coerced him. Pasquale identified 4 individuals: Michele Zagaria, Giuseppe Di Bari, Domenico Margiotta, and Vincenzo Corritella. He alleged that this group was waiting in the forest. According to him, there was no plan to harm or assault Graziella, but he had lost a bet with them. As a result, they pressured him to lure her into the woods. Pasquale recounted that when Graziella arrived in the forest, the 4 young men attacked her. They stopped her from escaping and forced her into silence. When they heard adults searching for her, they panicked. Fearing legal consequences, they decided to get rid of her. However, they didn't have any fuel to start a fire. Growing desperate, they tried to set her clothes on fire but failed. At one point, Graziella regained consciousness and screamed, prompting them to beat her again until she passed out. They tried to start the fire again, this time covering her body with leaves and using a lighter. The flames finally caught. All 4 young men came from respected families and had no history of violent behavior or serious crimes. Those who knew them described them as calm and well-mannered. Only one of them had a criminal record for a minor theft. Despite Pasquale's testimony, the idea that these 4 young men had decided to burn Graziella alive seemed unimaginable. However, once Pasquale provided their names, the police swiftly arrested them. News of their arrest shocked Italy, with the media covering every detail and fueling public outrage. From the beginning, the 4 suspects denied any involvement in Graziella's death. They claimed they had no idea why they were under investigation. Still, detectives remained determined to interrogate them until they uncovered the full truth about what happened that night. Unlike Pasquale, there was no physical evidence connecting the 4 men to the crime. When police searched their homes, nothing incriminating was found. They did acknowledge that Pasquale had an unhealthy obsession with Graziella, but they strongly denied having any part in her murder. Despite lengthy interrogations, none of the suspects admitted to any involvement. With no solid evidence against them, they were released but remained under close surveillance as the primary suspects. In a chilling development, the same 4 young men were later seen carrying Graziella's coffin at her funeral. Pasquale revealed that they were crying, appearing to be deeply affected by the loss. While detained, the young men claimed they were devastated because they recognized the young girl, often seeing her in the Monsi family's shop, even though they never spoke to her. The police suspected that their presence at the funeral was not coincidental. Although their connection to Graziella's family was minimal, they might have been burdened by guilt and sought some form of redemption. Alternatively, they might have been attempting to monitor the investigation into their possible involvement in the crime. During the next round of interrogations, the suspects were questioned separately. Vincenzo and Giuseppe claimed they had an alibi, supported by the testimony of young Luda. They stated that they had been at the city's gaming club on the day Graziella disappeared. Meanwhile, Michele and Domenico refused to cooperate with the investigation, declined to answer questions, and demanded lawyers, which only heightened police suspicion. The detectives proceeded to verify Vincenzo and Giuseppe's alibi by visiting the gaming club. While their presence at the club was confirmed, they left after about an hour and were unable to account for their whereabouts afterward. As a result, investigators couldn't rule out their involvement in Graziella's torture. Unexpectedly, Michele and Domenico confessed to the crime, largely corroborating Pasquale's account. According to their confession, the group invited them to the forest that evening, saying they wanted to play with fire. When Michelle and Domenico arrived, the others were already present. Pasquale was assigned to lure a victim and chose Graziella, a girl who, according to their friends, made him feel uneasy but seemed like an easy target. Pasquale later confirmed that he had discovered Graziella by the fountain while she was fetching water. He lured her by inviting her to see puppies that had recently been born in the nearby forest. Graziella, trusting and unsuspecting, did not imagine that this could lead to harm and agreed out of curiosity. Pasquale deceived and coaxed Graziella into following him. Since Graziella loved animals, she was eager to see the puppies, especially because Pasquale was someone she knew and trusted. She never expected such a cruel betrayal. The wooded area where the ambush was planned was nearby, about a 15 to 20-minute walk from where he first approached her. By then, her grandfather would have already begun searching for her. When they reached the location, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo jumped out from their hiding spots. Graziella was terrified. In that moment, she likely realized she had been trapped, but it was too late. She had no way to defend herself. While mildly intoxicated, the perpetrators continued drinking and seemed to take amusement in Graziella's fear. According to their later confessions, they claimed they didn't plan to assault her but merely wanted to torment and mock her, taking advantage of her vulnerability. Graziella was so frightened that she went into a state of shock. During the incident, their group accidentally caused Graziella to fall and hit her head against a stone. Initially, the group claimed they did not plan to imprison her. Their intention was to restrain her to scare her further, but she collapsed and lost consciousness. Believing she was dead, they panicked, fearing that she was already being searched for. Likely due to alcohol intoxication clouding their judgment, they decided to destroy all evidence of what had occurred. They thought setting a fire would accomplish this. Some claims by the suspects were partially supported by evidence. For instance, the forensic examination did not conclusively reveal any signs of abuse. Graziella was discovered wearing underwear. The condition of the remains was poor due to severe burns, which made it impossible to confirm or rule out abuse. The Carabinieri suspected that fire might have destroyed evidence, as hoped by the group. At the time, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo continued to insist that the incident had been accidental. The court finally decided the fate of the juvenile offenders. Vincenzo and Giuseppe confessed that they had gone to the forest because Pasquale invited them, unaware of what playing with fire meant. They claimed they were unwittingly drawn into something far more sinister. According to their testimony, they were horrified by what transpired and quickly left, not wanting to remain at the scene. However, they failed to realize that this dangerous situation would ultimately lead to police intervention. Their actions were driven by fear, either of the other participants or of the legal consequences they could face if accused of taking part. Despite inconsistencies in the group's accounts, the trial concluded with Pasquale Tortora receiving the lightest sentence, 30 years in prison. This was due to two key factors. First, he was the only member who cooperated voluntarily with the investigation. Second, despite extensive tests conducted by investigators, the evidence consistently showed that Pasquale was not the one who set Graziella's body on fire, although he actively participated in the abuse. Investigators concluded that the four criminals, Michelle, Giuseppe, Domenico, and Vincenzo, were responsible for dumping the body, and they imposed severe punishment on them. Convicted of kidnapping, child abuse, and premeditated murder, they received life sentences in solitary confinement. This meant they would remain in prison for the rest of their lives without interaction with other inmates. During the reading of the verdict, Graziella's mother fainted and had to be assisted by her husband. At the same time, tensions erupted among the defendants' families, resulting in arguments. Graziella's relatives expressed satisfaction with the sentences, believing them to be justified, except in the case of Pasquale, who they felt had been punished too lightly for luring their child into the woods and sealing her tragic fate. The court's severe ruling angered Vincenzo and Giuseppe, both of whom maintained their innocence adamantly. Their fervent claims gained them some supporters who believed their protestations, but this did not lead to a successful appeal. 8 years later, Vincenzo Corritella, 27, ended his life, possibly out of despair or guilt over his actions. While in prison, he discreetly brought a rope cord into his cell and used it to end his life. Just days prior, his mother had visited him and continued to firmly believe in his innocence. However, he had already lost hope. On June 19, 2013, Michelle's lawyer requested a retrial, citing alleged judicial errors in opposing the verdict. The court, however, denied the request. Pasquale's mother publicly apologized to the Monsi family for her son's actions, expressing her belief that he should fully face the consequences of his crime. Despite this, Graziella's mother rejected the apology. She responded firmly, stating that Pasquale should experience the same pain their daughter had endured. She held the belief that if he had not led Graziella into the forest, their daughter would still be alive. As a result, Graziella's parents primarily blamed Pasquale for their loss. Graziella Monsi's name remains etched in memory across Italy. Near Castel del Monte, a small tombstone commemorates her, featuring her name, photograph, and a brief account of her tragically short life. Locals and tourists often leave flowers and toys at the site, though it is most frequently visited by Graziella's close family and friends. 24 years after the tragedy, Pasquale Tortora was released from prison. His original sentence was reduced by 6 years due to good behavior. Now 44 years old, he is attempting to rebuild his life, though it is uncertain whether he will succeed. Among the group involved in the crime, Pasquale was the only one tried through an abbreviated process, which led to a lighter punishment. Following the incident, the boys who were involved severed ties with each other. Their relationships remained fractured, even after Pasquale's release. He has expressed deep regret, stating that not a day passes without him reflecting on the harm he caused to Graziella and her family. Pasquale admits that, if given the chance to turn back time, he would never have committed the crime. Throughout his ordeal, his family provided crucial support, helping him endure that dark period and rebuild his life, a kindness for which he remains deeply grateful. Dasha, Graziella's mother, strongly objected to Pasquale's early release, claiming that it weakened the integrity of the law. She believes that individuals like him remain dangerous to society, are incapable of change, and should not be given second chances. Vincenzo and Giuseppe, both maintaining their innocence, questioned why Pasquale acted as he did. Vincenzo tragically died, leaving behind a suicide note in which he insisted on his innocence and expressed anger at the injustice he had endured. He entrusted evidence to a trusted person to support his claims in the future but lost the will to continue fighting for his freedom. Giuseppe, Domenico, and Michelle remain isolated. Giuseppe continues to proclaim his innocence, spending his days reading the Bible. He has accepted his sentence and is not pursuing an appeal but firmly believes he will eventually be released when his complete lack of involvement in the murder is proven. His lawyer and family share this belief, as did the late Vincenzo. All three insist that Pasquale masterminded the tragedy. They assert that he lured Graziella into the forest, tortured her, and was solely responsible for the crime. Their claims are backed by evidence. Only Pasquale's body showed signs of a struggle, such as scratches inflicted by Graziella. His clothes had dirt and her blood on them, while the others had no such traces. Despite this, Pasquale received the lightest sentence and has been released. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Pauline Zeil. On February 22, 1995, Pauline Zeil heard the verdict of the court for the crime she had committed. She was lucky to avoid the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tears streamed down her face as she held the hand of her lawyer, seeking comfort despite her unfortunate outcome. she had avoided being placed in a cell with 5 other inmates on death row. Pauline Zeil was a devoted mother, working 2 jobs to support her children. From her first marriage, she had a daughter named Christina. With her second husband, John Zeil, she had 2 sons. Christina lived with her father's relatives in Maryland for a time and did not live with her mother. Many who knew Pauline considered her a good mother. Although she was abandoned by her mother and grew up in an orphanage, no one suspected that she could become a danger to society, especially to her own family. Christina lived with her grandmother, and they had a good relationship. However, just before a series of unfortunate events, her grandmother gave Christina to her mother in Florida. Because they had been separated for so long, Christina was not happy about this reunion. In June 1994, she lived in her mother's small 2-room apartment in Riviera Beach with her 2 younger brothers and John Zeil, her stepfather. John was indifferent to Christina, creating a tense family atmosphere. For months later, Christina's mother, Pauline, reported to the police that her daughter had been kidnapped. While in a crowded store, 7-year-old Christina went into the women's restroom and did not return. Pauline searched everywhere but could not find her. The police took her report seriously and began searching for Christina. During a television appearance, Pauline became emotional, begging for her daughter's safe return, but no one suspected that her feelings might not be sincere. As the police investigated, Pauline's family, friends, and acquaintances revealed that the couple often argued. The tension in the family was not only due to Christina's presence but also to Pauline's marriage to her second husband, John. They argued daily, and he was very controlling. He did not hesitate to resort to violence if things went wrong. Neighbors often heard their arguments, and he was also known to have abused Christina. The police speculated that Christina may have run away, feeling resentment toward her mother and stepfather, and sought comfort from her grandmother, where she had a happier childhood. They began to follow up on this line of investigation. The grandmother stated that she had not seen Christina since she returned her to her mother, although she missed her very much. Interviews with witnesses at a nearby store yielded no useful information. No one had seen a girl matching Christina's description that day, and there were no security cameras in the area. Despite a thorough search of the store, they found no trace of Christina. Then the police discovered a crucial clue: Pauline had sold her bicycle and a videotape. When asked about these items at Christina's school, her mother dismissed them, saying they were no longer needed. At the time, everyone was still hopeful that Christina was alive, but this new information was very disturbing. The police began to question whether Christina had actually been in the store that day and considered the possibility that Pauline's story was a lie intended to mislead the investigation. 2 weeks after Christina's disappearance, the police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched the home where Christina lived with her mother. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any useful information. They could not find any clues at the time. Pauline, the girl's mother and the last person to see her alive, became the prime suspect. However, the situation changed dramatically a few days later when Pauline went to the police in tears and confessed. She claimed that her husband, John, had beaten their daughter to death, but insisted it was an accident. Pauline provided a detailed account of Christina's final moments. A victim of domestic violence, she admitted to fabricating the kidnapping story to mislead the police. Her efforts to cover up the crime ultimately contributed to her long prison sentence. John Zeil lived with his wife, Pauline, and their sons in a cramped apartment. They struggled financially, and the difficult living conditions may have contributed to negative feelings towards their daughter, Christina. On September 16, 1994, John lost control and beat Christina because she was dirty and had problems with urinary incontinence. Neighbors heard noises, including John's screams and Christina's cries, which sounded different from the typical cries of a child. They could hear muffled thumping, followed by Christina screaming louder. Eventually, the noise died down, but the mother begged John to stop. During the incident, Christina lost consciousness and began to convulse. John hit her hard enough to silence her and covered her mouth with his hand, causing her to choke. When things finally quieted down, neighbors could hear John's panicked voice. John and Pauline hid Christina's body in a closet for a week before moving it to a vacant lot behind a shopping center to bury it. Pauline agreed to reveal Christina's burial location. On October 27th, Christina's body was found. She had multiple stab wounds. Forensic experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. The child had suffocated while trying to cover her face with her hands. Police discovered that while the body was in the closet, the couple had prepared for the burial by purchasing items such as shovels, tarps, cleaning supplies, and other necessary tools. Pauline had acted cautiously. She took Christina's belongings, such as her bicycle and videotapes, to a pawn shop. She later admitted that she had done so to erase the memory of her daughter. However, the reality was simpler. She had used the money from the pawn to pay for the burial and clean the house. Pauline blamed her husband for their daughter's death, claiming that he was responsible for killing her. But later revelations changed the story. John claimed that Pauline never intervened when he was beating Christina. On the day he lost control and attacked Christina, he asked Pauline to call for help to save the girl while she was still alive, but Pauline refused to help their daughter. During questioning, Pauline admitted this. She believed that the girl could still be saved, but she was too afraid of facing the consequences of her actions to take her to the hospital. The police discovered that Christina had been abused many times before. Despite this, Pauline never intervened to stop the abuse. Even when Christina begged Pauline for help during John's attack, Pauline showed no interest. Pauline Zeil and John Zeil were later arrested and charged with child abuse and concealing evidence. Pauline, who has 2 sons, faced losing her parental rights. Realizing this during the first hearing, she voluntarily relinquished her rights to her sons through their attorney. A foster family took in the children. Pauline Zeil's trial began, during which she denied her guilt and blamed John for what had happened. Her lawyer argued that Christina's death was accidental, but the prosecution countered effectively, highlighting clear evidence of violence. The defense claimed there were many mitigating circumstances, stating that Pauline was a loving mother and that her colleagues respected her. The lawyers attempted to argue that Pauline was controlled by John, an abusive husband who kept her in a constant state of fear, which prevented her from fighting back. However, the prosecution pointed out that Pauline herself admitted she could have saved her daughter but chose not to. Relatives from Christina's biological father's side, including her grandmother, who had cared for Christina for many years, claimed that from the moment Christina was born, her mother had considered her unwanted and did not want to care for her. They expressed remorse for returning Christina to her mother, Pauline. The prosecution argued that John played a key role in Christina's murder. They claimed that Pauline's actions were completely contrary to her maternal instincts, as she failed to protect her child and did not call for help. Pauline's lawyers disputed this view. However, there was no doubt that both parents were responsible for her death. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. They agreed with the prosecution and found Pauline Zeil guilty of first-degree murder because she was with John when he harmed her and actively participated in covering up the crime, including burying the child in a vacant lot. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 13 years for concealing evidence and child abuse, rendering her ineligible for parole. When Pauline's sentence was announced, she cried tears of joy, relieved to avoid the death penalty in the electric chair. Although her lawyers planned to appeal the verdict, claiming it was unjust, their efforts were rejected. The prosecutor stated that the verdict should serve as a warning to abusive parents, emphasizing that such individuals would face serious legal consequences. The case provoked a strong emotional response from the public. As a result, the jury had to be changed to ensure their decision was fair. Many were shocked that Pauline did not intervene to save her daughter, did not call for help, and actively participated in the cover-up of the horrific crime. The public reaction led to a wave of protests. Experts noted that many children are often victims of violence at the hands of their own parents. This situation has been exacerbated by a series of similar crimes in recent years. In California, a woman killed her 3 children, the youngest being 4 years old and the others being 8 and 9. She attempted to blame her husband, who lived far away from the children. The husband fought for custody of the children but had a solid alibi, as he was hundreds of miles away when the tragic events occurred. In 1998, the woman was sentenced to death and is still awaiting execution. There have been many similar cases reported in the media, most notably the 1983 case of Elizabeth Diane Downs. Elizabeth claimed that a stranger shot her 3 children after she picked him up on a deserted road. However, it was revealed that she had shot them herself. Her 7-year-old daughter died as a result, and her 2 other children were left disabled. Elizabeth is currently serving a life sentence for first-degree murder and attempted murder, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, but she has been denied parole several times. A common theme in these cases is that mothers often try to blame their husbands for their actions. Police have become increasingly skeptical of these attempts at blame. This skepticism is evident in Pauline's statements, as police note that her case is not an isolated one. There are many cases of postpartum depression and similar issues affecting mothers. A psychiatrist points out that many tragic child deaths could have been prevented if mothers had received proper support. However, in Pauline's case, there was no indication of any mental health issues, which is why she is facing serious charges. Everyone involved in the case knew the details and believed that Pauline could have prevented her daughter's death. Not only did she fail to stop her husband, but she also missed the opportunity to seek help. When she called for assistance, she could have received guidance that might have saved Christina. However, Pauline deliberately chose not to pursue this option. It was also revealed that Pauline had worked as a nurse. She had a medical degree and was educated and trained in emergency care. Despite this, she made no attempt to help her daughter. John Ziles' trial then began. The prosecutor aimed for the harshest punishment, seeking the death penalty by electric chair. John admitted to beating Christina but denied any responsibility for her death. He claimed it was an accident and that he had no intention of killing her. He had simply misjudged his own strength. His first trial ended in a mistrial due to the jury's inability to reach a unanimous decision. His second trial took place in another city in November 1996, where he was convicted of first-degree murder, concealing evidence, and aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years for child abuse and concealing evidence. John listened to the verdict with an impassive expression. The judge ruled that the case was not serious enough to warrant the death penalty, so he overturned that aspect of the sentence. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ashley Dale. On a summer night in 2022, an innocent woman fell victim in Liverpool's Old Swan district, just a few miles from the city centre. At 12:41 a.m. on August 21, 2022, police received a call from a neighbor reporting a violent situation taking place next door. When the police arrived, the house was eerily quiet, with the front door clearly broken open, suggesting that a violent incident had occurred. The back door leading to the garden was left ajar. As the police cautiously entered the garden, they discovered the body of a woman. Just a few meters away, her mobile phone appeared to have slipped from her hand in her final moments. They quickly understood the gravity of the situation when they found a number of spent bullet casings scattered around the house. While one officer was investigating the crime scene, other officers arrived, waking several neighbors with the noise. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots coming from the house, while others said they heard screeching tires and car alarms going off hours before the incident. The tragic event left everyone in the area shocked. Neighbors helped the police identify the victim as 28-year-old Ashley Dale. Ashley grew up in a close-knit family and was the oldest of 3 siblings. In 2015, her younger brother was mistakenly murdered by a gang at the age of 16. Ashley was deeply affected by the death of her younger brother, which changed her outlook on life. However, she persevered, using her grief as motivation to study and eventually earn a degree in environmental conservation. This achievement led to a fulfilling career as an environmental conservationist, where she thrived and earned the respect of her colleagues. They admired not only her dedication to her work but also her genuine compassion for those around her. In her role, Ashley focused on various projects to improve living conditions and public health in the city, establishing herself as a hardworking, intelligent, and goal-oriented person. In her personal life, Ashley Dale cherished time with her family, friends, and dog. Her loved ones described her as intelligent, kind, and caring. Despite her difficult past and the pain of losing a loved one, she moved forward with determination and succeeded in her path. However, things became more complicated when she started dating Lee Heiress, a man with deep ties to the criminal world. His connections to gangs caused serious concerns for Ashley's family, who feared for her safety. Although Ashley believed that Lee was gradually changing, she still trusted him. Lee Heiress, a 28-year-old man from Liverpool, was deeply involved with many gangs and banned substance trafficking. He was particularly close to Neil Berry, a local banned substance dealer. However, their friendship began to decline in 2018 due to issues related to banned substance and trust. That year, Neil was robbed of $50,000 worth of banned substance hidden in his home in an incident orchestrated by a rival gang. Neil suspected that Lee Heiress may have informed his rivals about the incident. Although Lee denied any wrongdoing, their relationship soured, turning them into enemies. In June 2022, Lee Heiress and Ashley Dale bumped into each other at the Glastonbury Festival, rekindling old feelings. However, they also encountered a member of Neil's gang, leading to a violent brawl due to their rivalry. Neil, who was at the festival, threatened to stab Lee the next time they encountered each other. The following day, police arrested Neil and his friends for his threatening behavior. Luckily for Neil, a friend of his took the blame when a knife was found next to Neil's passport, claiming it was his. The friend, James Witham, was later arrested on suspicion of carrying a weapon, but despite the police involvement, tensions remained high following the Glastonbury incident. Ashley's life changed dramatically after that. The encounter with the gang left her feeling paranoid and fearful. Over the following weeks, her concerns about physical threats from Neil Berry grew. Not only had he threatened them during the festival, but he had also warned that he would show up at their home address. This terrifying prospect had a profound effect on Ashley, and she confided in her best friend. She expressed her anxiety in a text message, saying she can't stop thinking that something is wrong. As her anxiety grew, Ashley reached out to several friends for support. In another message, she described how distressing the situation had become and how it was affecting her mental health. Despite her efforts to calm herself, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was ahead. Unfortunately, her intuition was correct. On the evening of August 20th, 2022, Ashley posted a photo of herself relaxing on the couch, completely unaware of what would happen after dark. Then, her car alarm suddenly went off. It was her car, but she ignored it. Frustrated, she continued to enjoy the evening and texted a friend about the siren going off again, assuming it was because of the rain. The message seemed normal, but there was a paranoid undertone. That night, she sent another message saying, "She don't know, but it looks like someone is outside." Over time, Ashley's anxiety increased, and her car alarm went off again, reinforcing her belief that someone was outside and that something was seriously wrong. On the morning of August 21st, the doorbell rang, and Ashley sensed that it was bad news. The sound echoed through the quiet house, and suddenly, the door swung open, revealing an armed man standing in the doorway. He acted quickly, opening fire without giving her a chance to react. In a panic, Ashley grabbed her phone and ran out the back door. The attacker then moved throughout the house, shooting into several rooms in an attempt to find her, hoping she was hiding in the backyard. Ashley faced her final moments with extreme fear. She could not escape the violence or her fatal injuries, and the final text messages she sent just before the attack served as a haunting reminder of her awareness of the danger. Tragically, Ashley Dale was murdered, and many suspect that Lee Harrison's connection to gang activity contributed to her death. Police discovered that all of Ashley's tires had been slashed, likely due to the attacker's actions, which had set off her car alarm. Police believe this was a deliberate attempt to lure Ashley and Lee Harrison away from their home. When her family heard her last text message, they were devastated to realize that she had sensed something was seriously wrong. Fortunately, Ashley's text message contained vital information that would help solve her murder. Police now need to piece together the evidence. However, the investigation remains tense and complicated, especially because of her boyfriend, Lee Harrison. He happened to be absent during the shooting and was very unwilling to cooperate with the police, even refusing to testify. When he was brought in for questioning, he chose to remain silent, which hampered the investigation. He changed his mobile phone number and shunned Ashley's entire family, leaving them devastated. Lee's lack of empathy only increased concerns about his possible involvement in her death. Police were surprised to discover that shortly after Ashley's death, he had gone on holiday and left the country. This raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if he had done this to avoid prosecution. While he was on holiday, they focused on the events that took place on the night of August 20th, 2022. Surveillance camera footage showed them entering a store. After making a purchase, they left and got into a gray Hyundai i3. This car later became key evidence, as another surveillance camera recorded it near Ashley's home earlier that day. Surveillance camera footage captured a car approaching Ashley's home, showing the driver surveying the area before the attack that evening. James Witham and Joseph Piers approached Ashley's Volkswagen parked outside the family home and punctured the tires in order to set off the alarm. They attempted to lure Lee or Ashley out, but neither responded. Frustrated, they decided to retreat and come up with a new plan, which went badly wrong. An hour later, both men returned to Ashley's home, but this time one of them was armed, indicating their violent intentions. They broke into the house by forcing down the front door and saw Ashley running toward the back door. When she reached the garden door, James fired 8 shots from his pistol, hitting her in the back. After watching her fall, he went upstairs and fired 5 more shots into an empty bedroom, possibly as a threat. After a quick survey of the house and finding no one else inside, James quickly ran downstairs. Both James and Joseph then fled the scene. Fortunately, a neighbor's surveillance camera recorded the events that followed the attack. James and Joseph checked into a hotel in St. Helens to avoid detection. However, the police were able to track their movements and quickly located their car, leading to their arrest. Meanwhile, Neil Barry, who played a key role in organizing the attack, was spotted at a local golf club. Intelligence reports also indicated that he had been seen at a golf resort. The police worked together effectively to arrest him, and soon a fourth accomplice, Sean Zeiss, was arrested in connection with Ashley's murder. After the arrest and indictment of James Witham, Neil Barry, Sean Zeiss, and Joseph Pearce, the police gathered evidence, leading to the start of the trial. James Witham, who shot Ashley, initially claimed he did not intend to kill her. He argued that he intended to shoot her as a warning but accidentally hit her, asserting that her death was accidental. However, this defense was difficult to believe in court due to the overwhelming evidence, including previous threats, text messages, extensive surveillance camera footage, and numerous witness statements. When Ashley discovered that two armed men had broken into her home, she screamed in fear and tried to escape through the back door. James, who was armed, had time to aim. He fired 2 shots at Ashley, hitting her in the back as she tried to run away. It was clear that he had shot her intentionally. In November 2023, at Liverpool Crown Court, the judge sentenced James Witham, 41, Neil Barry, 26, Sean Zeiss, 28, and Joseph Pearce, 29, for murder, conspiracy to murder, and unlawful possession of a firearm. The 4 were sentenced to a total of 173 years in prison. James was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 43 years, Neil to life with the possibility of parole after 47 years, Joseph to life with the possibility of parole after 41 years, and Sean to life with the possibility of parole after 42 years. The sentencing of Ashley Dales for killers has left her family with mixed emotions. Although they feel that justice has been served, it can never replace the profound loss they have experienced. Ashley Dale's tragic death has left her family in a state of grief. Ashley's mother described the loss as life-changing. Adding to their grief, Ashley's younger brother was killed by the same gang. Her father lamented, "Ashley, the eldest of my 3 children, and my son are now both gone." Despite the loss, the family has become advocates against gang violence, working to unite the community and provide support through memorials for Ashley. Meanwhile, Ashley's boyfriend, Lee Harrison, has faced no consequences and remains at large. Even after his girlfriend was murdered, he continued to sell banned substance for profit. Gun violence in the UK is low, with one of the lowest gun-related homicide rates in the world. Despite a population increase since 2011, the average number of gun homicides in the UK remains at 29 per year. The level of gang violence in the UK has only increased in recent years, possibly due to poverty and lack of education. The situation in the gang world is not improving. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bill Mowbray. Bill Mowbray lived in Brownsville, Texas, USA, in 1987. He was a decent and loving man who was married to Susie. This was his second marriage. From his first marriage, Bill had a daughter named Christine, who lived with her mother. When Susie met Bill, she was also divorced and had brought her 2 children to live with them. Over the past 9 years, they have built a happy family together. They were only 4 years apart in age and shared many things in common. Despite Susie's eccentric personality, Bill thought of her as the ideal wife. Bill was dedicated not only to his family but also to his career. After attending college, He began working in car sales and eventually transformed into a prominent businessman. By 1987, he had successfully managed Mal Motors, a Cadillac dealership in Brownsville, for 13 years. Susie actively supported his work, often visiting the dealership and even appearing in commercials broadcast across the city. Their success brought them considerable wealth, making them local celebrities regularly seen on TV. The family enjoyed traveling and owned a large mansion in Brownsville, 2 beachfront villas, and several luxury cars. On the surface, their life appeared enviable, but in reality, it was far less glamorous. In recent years, Bill's business had struggled, with the dealership stagnating and showing no signs of growth. Bill realized he was sinking deeper into debt because his expenses far exceeded his income. Despite facing financial difficulties, they upheld an image of wealth and continued to spend lavishly. As their money problems worsened, it became evident they were facing a serious financial crisis. By 1987, the situation had also severely impacted Bill's mental health. He began suffering from depression and often voiced that ending his own life might be the only way to escape their predicament. For Susie, this was an extremely difficult time. Her husband had never spoken or behaved this way before, and she feared he might do something drastic. His relatives were equally concerned for his well-being. They arranged consultations with a psychotherapist in the hopes of helping him, but their efforts yielded little progress. Bill remained firm in his belief that their family urgently needed money, otherwise, the business would collapse, leaving them on the verge of poverty. A solution to their financial struggles seemed nowhere in sight. Facing the threat of bankruptcy, Susie and Bill ultimately believed their best hope lay in securing a new loan from the bank. On September 15, 1987, Susie, 39, and Bill, 43, called to wish Susie's son a happy 16th birthday. At the time, her son and daughter were visiting their father. The conversation was warm and enjoyable, and everything seemed normal. Later that evening, Susie and Bill watched a TV show together before heading to bed. In the early hours of the morning, around 2:15 a.m., Susie woke up to the terrifying scene of her husband holding a weapon pointed at his own head. Before she could react, he pulled the trigger, using his right hand while lying on his side. Shocked and terrified, Susie called out to him, but he didn't respond. Blood rapidly soaked the bed, and with mounting horror, she realized the gravity of his injury. Panicked, she rushed to the home phone to seek help but accidentally dialed the number of her work partner, Bill Luke Roy, instead of emergency services. Susie told Luke what had happened and confessed she didn't know what to do. Luke immediately urged her to call 911. She followed the advice and called the emergency services. However, she had already lost precious minutes, which forced the ambulance to set off immediately. When the ambulance crew arrived at the scene, they found Susie outside the house, standing calmly with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Showing no signs of distress, she led the paramedics inside and gestured toward the bedroom without entering it. Inside, Bill was lying on the bed, still alive but in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later passed away. The cause of death was clear: a weapon injury to the head. Beside him lay a weapon in a pool of blood. Initially, investigators suspected that he had harmed himself, but they decided to carry out a more thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. Forensic experts began analyzing the scene. The unusually large volume of blood warranted a detailed investigation. Blood spatters were found on much of the furniture, on the wall near the bed, and even on the ceiling fan. Fortunately, a blood spatter expert was brought in to assist. The expert confirmed that Bill had died from a single wound to the head. The only fingerprints found on the weapon during testing were Bill's. Susie has consistently maintained her perspective on the story since the beginning, asserting that Bill suffered from prolonged depression, had a tendency to harm himself, and had expressed these thoughts to multiple people on several occasions. Some of her statements were corroborated by her relatives and friends, as well as Bill's. Bill, a businessman, had been facing mounting challenges in managing his dealership, which seemed to have worsened his mental health. However, Susie's behavior raised significant doubts. She does not seem to be a grieving widow. Instead, she discusses her husband's death calmly, as though it were merely a trivial matter. Still, this wasn't the primary reason investigators began to scrutinize her further. The most shocking detail emerged in the 12 hours following Bill's death. During this time, Jim, Bill's brother, arrived at Bill's residence intending to speak with Susie, offer her support, and try to piece together what had happened by observing the scene. To his surprise, when Jim went upstairs, he heard music and the laughter of women. When he knocked, Susie came out casually and explained that she was hosting a party with friends. Jim found her behavior to be deeply inappropriate and upsetting. Later, Jim became one of Susie's most vocal critics as she desperately tried to prove her innocence. It was discovered that the women attending the gathering had removed all the furniture and carpeting from the bedroom. Not only were they listening to music and socializing, but the most alarming revelation was that they had repainted the bedroom a different color. Police viewed these actions as obvious attempts to interfere with evidence. Despite these suspicious actions, the blood expert successfully reconstructed the sequence of the incident. It is now clear that the case had nothing to do with Bill's self-harm. Detectives became convinced that Susie was the one who had pulled the trigger. Based on evidence collected on the first day, there appeared to be little doubt remaining. The focus then shifted to the remaining pieces of furniture and the nightgown Susie had been wearing. After thorough analysis, the expert concluded that Bill had been murdered by his wife, who had attacked him in the head while he was asleep. Susie was shocked when accused and immediately sought legal help by hiring a lawyer. The financial difficulties in their family's marriage have been confirmed by multiple sources. Susie said that Bill's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a bank loan led him to harm himself. Bill's family was aware of his dire financial situation, but not everyone believed that Susie was completely innocent. Detectives interviewed a loan officer at the bank who had interacted with Bill. The officer recounted how Bill had visited the bank in a deeply distraught state, even breaking down in tears. Bill reportedly stated that, without approval for a $200,000 loan, he would die. Unfortunately, Bill's financial situation was bleak, and his loan application was rejected. The loan officer had no choice but to turn him down. Numerous witnesses attested to Bill's desperation and emotional turmoil. Despite this evidence of Bill's deteriorating mental health, suspicions about Susie remained strong. Her behavior following her husband's death was widely perceived as celebratory rather than mournful. This interpretation led to widespread public condemnation and further distrust of her character. However, her lawyer firmly maintained her innocence. Bill Mowbray, a businessman, applied for a bank loan to keep his business running and pay off existing debts. However, the bank's refusal devastated him. That evening, he returned home deeply distressed and barely interacted with anyone. Susie did her best to console him, but her efforts did little to ease his despair. In the final days of his life, Bill fell into a severe depression as he desperately searched for a solution to his financial crisis. Later, Susie shared that after this incident, Bill frequently spoke about ending his life. She tried to support him by accompanying him to a psychotherapist. The lawyer worked to find evidence that substantiated Susie's claims, and succeeded. Several of Bill's longtime friends revealed that, approximately a decade before the tragedy, Bill had attempted to end his life. This had occurred in the 1970s, before Susie and Bill married, which explained why Susie had never mentioned it. After meeting Susie, his life seemed to improve, and those close to him believed that his past struggles had been overcome. This information further reinforces the narrative that Bill has a history of self-harm. The defense attorney believed this evidence would strongly support Susie if the case went to trial. He dismissed the notion that Susie was implicated in the crime by the gathering at their house following the tragedy. Furthermore, he argued that the prosecution's case relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be easily challenged. Susie's unusual behavior was not enough to indicate that she might resort to violence. Bill's family, however, argued that Susie's actions demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward him. Meanwhile, an outraged Jim demanded justice for Bill and insisted that the killer be held responsible. Investigators suspect that someone else may have been involved in the crime and are questioning the circumstances surrounding the incident. Specifically, they were puzzled why Bill chose to end his life while lying next to his wife in bed. Typically, individuals who wish to end their lives tend to prefer doing so in solitude. If Bill were to choose to end his own life, he would have two methods to consider: either keeping a loaded weapon nearby, such as placing it by his bed or under his pillow, or waking up in the middle of the night, retrieving the weapon, and returning to bed before using it. Susie claimed she didn't notice Bill getting up at night, though it's possible she simply didn't wake up. She mentioned that she had once handled her husband's weapon after discovering it under the pillow. She explained that he kept it in the bedroom for self-defense, adding that such behavior was typical among Texans. Detectives, however, questioned why there were no fingerprints on the weapon if Susie had truly picked it up. Susie claimed that Bill regularly cleaned and wiped the weapon, but investigators remained skeptical. They began scrutinizing the dynamics of Susie's and Bill's relationship. During the inquiry, they discovered that she had multiple extramarital affairs during her marriage, and, importantly, Bill was aware of them. After numerous acts of infidelity, she and her children had left him and moved to Austin. However, Bill eventually persuaded her to return, and they resumed living together. Despite this reconciliation, many believed the relationship remained deeply strained. Susie and Bill were preparing for a divorce and discussing how to divide their assets, which created significant tension and might have given her a motive to murder her husband. Susie's behavior following the incident raised further suspicions. After the incident, upon realizing that her husband was seriously injured but still alive, she chose not to call an ambulance, a decision that might have increased his chances of survival. Instead, she called a colleague, Bill Luke Roy. Susie claimed she was confused and unsure of what to do in such a situation, so she sought advice from a family friend. This initially led some to speculate that Luke might have been involved in the crime, though no evidence supported this theory. According to Luke, Susie's voice lacked any signs of panic during their phone call. Nonetheless, Luke advised her to contact emergency services, which Susie did without hesitation after speaking with him. When experts investigated the scene and examined Bill's body, they discovered a bullet wound in his left hand. Strangely, despite the close-range attack, Susie, Bill's wife, was not covered in blood. Forensic experts noted that an attack at point-blank range typically produces small blood droplets. However, Bill's right hand was found neatly tucked beneath the pillow, which makes the possibility of him causing harm to himself in this manner highly unlikely. The prosecution built a strong case with a solid motive: financial gain. Susie, Bill's wife, appeared to benefit greatly from her husband's death, particularly in terms of insurance. Shortly before his death, Bill had made significant changes to his insurance policy. He increased the payout amount to nearly $2 million but removed Susie as a beneficiary. Instead, he designated the payout to his daughter from a previous marriage, Christine. Susie had even contacted the insurance company in advance to confirm the details of the policy. Crucially, these changes to the policy were set to take effect just days after Bill's death. During her call with the insurance company, Susie uncovered crucial information, which indirectly pointed to the possibility of a motive to act quickly. With Bill weighed down by financial troubles, his death could secure the money needed to resolve their outstanding debts. Apparently, Bill had removed Susie from the beneficiary list due to a lack of trust in her and instead sought to provide lifelong financial security for his daughter. This situation raised several troubling implications. Firstly, if Bill had planned his own death, he likely would have waited for the amended insurance policy to officially take effect, which would have occurred in just a few days. Furthermore, as someone knowledgeable in legal and financial matters, he would have been aware of Texas laws regarding voluntary death. Specifically, insurance policies do not pay out compensation to beneficiaries if the insured dies voluntarily within 2 years of the policy's activation. This means all of Bill's intentions to secure his daughter's future were doomed from the outset. Detectives believed that Bill had no intention of ending his life willingly. When he spoke about such matters, it was likely to evoke pity or manipulate others, such as persuading the bank to grant him a loan. However, given the strange circumstances surrounding his death, it seemed he didn't end his life himself. Someone might have helped him. Based on circumstantial evidence, Susie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. At the trial, a key forensic method was used: blood spatter analysis. This technique, first introduced in the 1950s by Herbert MacDonald, played a critical role in providing evidence and substantiating the charges. MacDonald himself testified during Susie's trial, offering essential insights. Blood spatter analysis had been a foundational method in the U.S. justice system and widely accepted for years. However, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences raised doubts about its reliability, emphasizing that accurate and meaningful use of the analysis requires significant expertise and experience. Evidence in Bill's murder case was analyzed by inexperienced experts, but this oversight was overlooked during the trial. Although blood sample analysis has been heavily criticized, it remains valuable and continues to be used, now exclusively by highly qualified and experienced specialists. In the past, doubts about this method had led to the reconsideration of several convictions. However, by the time of Susie's case, Herbert MacDonald's method was widely accepted and largely unquestioned. During the trial, Susie's ex-husband defended her, stating that he had never observed any signs of aggression throughout their relationship. He also stated that Susie was not even aware of how to use a weapon. Additionally, a family friend named Luke, Bill's business partner and Susie's initial point of contact after the incident, supported her and expressed his belief that Bill may have willingly ended his own life. Luke explained that he had planned to leave the car dealership due to work-related issues, and this decision had deeply affected Bill. In the final days of Bill's life, he reportedly struggled with loneliness. The prosecutor's office persisted in proving its case. To strengthen its argument, it presented the marital bed as evidence during the trial, complete with two mannequins representing Bill and Susie, as well as traces of Bill's blood that were still visible. This allowed the prosecution to vividly illustrate its version of what transpired on that tragic night. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately convicted Susie of murder, sentencing her on June 5, 1988, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Susie still had a group of supporters who believed in her innocence, including her son, Wade, and her daughter from a previous marriage. Both worked tirelessly to overturn the conviction, firmly convinced that Susie had stood by her husband until the very end and was incapable of violence against him. While Susie served time in prison, Wade enrolled in law school and dedicated himself to meticulously reviewing the case. He searched for errors or misconduct by the prosecution and investigators, hoping to find grounds for an appeal. Wade collaborated closely with his mother's lawyer to challenge the verdict and fight for justice. The case required processing a massive amount of complex information, which made the effort time-consuming. Wade was determined to secure justice as Susie had already spent 8 years in prison. Eventually, Susie's lawyer submitted a critical appeal that could not be dismissed. During the prosecution's case, the blood spatter analysis played a key role, but serious concerns emerged about whether the forensic expert had been qualified to handle this aspect. The expert had examined over 40 stains found on the nightgown. Interestingly, the prosecution's main piece of evidence turned out to be its biggest weakness. The defense disputed the accuracy of the tests conducted on the nightgown, arguing that various substances, not just blood, could cause the fabric to glow. Moreover, the nightgown had never been specifically tested for blood, and since it was no longer available, its credibility as evidence was entirely compromised. The appeal was accepted, leading to a thorough reconsideration of the evidence before the 1990 retrial. The absence of blood spatter on the weapon can be explained as follows. The gunshot to Bill's left arm likely occurred while he was holding the weapon under the pillow, with his left hand positioned on the opposite side of his head. The shot caused an exit wound. Certain actions of the experts during the retrial seemed questionable. For instance, the forensic expert who conducted Bill's autopsy made a key statement. Although he admitted that he could not be absolutely certain Susie had killed Bill, he maintained, perhaps to protect his reputation, that Bill could not have harmed himself without external assistance. Given that only Bill and Susie were in the house, Susie was naturally seen as the prime suspect. Wade's legal studies and collaboration with attorneys proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that violated Susie's constitutional right to a fair trial. A major revelation emerged when the prosecution brought in Herbert MacDonald to re-examine Susie's nightgown and the prior findings. Contrary to the prosecutor's expectations, MacDonald decisively refuted the arguments supporting Susie's guilt. However, rather than sharing MacDonald's expert opinion, the prosecution deliberately concealed it and continued relying on the flawed evidence against Susie. Wade played a vital role in the fight for his mother's freedom. He now faced the challenge of presenting his findings to convince the jury. His analysis revealed deception on the prosecution's part, which violated the Brady Rule, a requirement for prosecutors to disclose all evidence that could potentially exonerate the defendant. MacDonald's findings were pivotal in exposing this misconduct. Finally, Susie's day in court arrived in January 1998. By then, the once vibrant woman had been deeply affected by her years in prison, reduced to a shadow of her former self. Yet, in her weary eyes, there remained a glimmer of hope. She continued to steadfastly maintain her innocence. Susie's friends, who attended the same unusual gathering where the bedroom was repainted after her husband's death, described the event as an odd prank. They explained that it was initiated by a woman attempting to cover up the unsettling red stains in the room. According to them, Susie was unaware that her actions would later lead to accusations of evidence tampering. Both friends defended her, with one stating that the room had not been cordoned off with police tape and no warning had been issued that the investigation was ongoing. In fact, investigators initially concluded that Bill's death was a result of self-harm and showed little interest in the scene. They had planned to close the case and archive it, allowing Susie to remain in the house without implementing any security measures, such as sealing the room with police tape. The other friend explained that the group merely wanted to help Susie, who hesitated to let her children return to a bedroom stained with blood. Influenced by alcohol, they decided to repaint the room before the kids came home. Neither friend believed that Susie was guilty of any wrongdoing. During the retrial, an unqualified expert who had analyzed Susie's nightgown admitted that his original testimony at her first trial was baseless and lacked scientific foundation. Forensic expert Herbert MacDonald reviewed the flawed methods used in the investigation and expressed disbelief. The stains were measured visually without proper tools, and there was no confirmation that the stains were even blood. As a result, the evidence was deemed unconvincing. Susie's lawyer presented a compelling argument during the trial, which led the jury to reconsider their stance. They began to entertain the possibility that Bill, Susie's husband, had voluntarily chosen to end his own life. Substantial evidence later emerged, outweighing the vague testimonies provided by several of Bill's friends. The defense strategy focused on one key factor underlying the tragedy: Bill's financial difficulties. After his loan application was denied, his business faced imminent collapse, pushing his family close to poverty. To ensure that his daughter from a previous marriage would receive a larger insurance payout, Bill is said to have decided to end his own life. He spent his remaining savings on increasing the life insurance payout for her. Bill's decision not to wait just a few additional days may have been driven by severe depression or a sudden deterioration in his mental health, which could have left him incapable of fully understanding the legal implications. Accounts of Bill's behavior in the days leading up to his death supported this conclusion. The defense attorney believed their case had been effectively argued. However, during the closing arguments, Susie unexpectedly lost control. As the prosecution delivered its final remarks, she screamed that she had not killed her husband and collapsed in tears. This emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. On one hand, the jury recognized the sincerity in Susie's tears and assertions of innocence. On the other hand, her uncontrolled aggression complicated the situation. Deliberations over the verdict lasted for 4 hours of tense uncertainty. Although no definitive resolution was reached regarding Susie's guilt or innocence, she was ultimately acquitted of all charges on January 23, 1998. Despite her acquittal, she continued to face opposition, with critics focusing heavily on her behavior throughout the trial. While Susie's actions were undoubtedly unusual at times, her supporters, including her son and daughter, attributed her behavior to the emotional toll and stress she endured during the ordeal. Her opponents, however, claimed that her outburst during the trial was a calculated attempt to manipulate the jury. In contrast, her lawyer argued that the outburst was unplanned, insisting that such a risky tactic would have been ill-advised, particularly since the defense had already presented substantial evidence that might have backfired with the jury. During subsequent hearings, it was revealed that the nightgown had never been used as evidence. This omission raised concerns among the investigative team, as items of such significance rarely vanish without explanation. Speculation arose that the prosecution, facing heavy criticism for their strategy, may have intentionally disposed of the nightgown to prevent further examination. This theory gained traction as many believed the nightgown might have undermined their case, particularly given the opinion of Herbert MacDonald, whose expertise could have discredited their claims. Faced with mounting challenges, the prosecution seemingly had no viable path to continue their case. Susie Mowbray was acquitted on her 50th birthday, turning the occasion into a celebratory milestone. She expressed her gratitude to her son, Wade, describing it as the best anniversary gift she had ever received. In a 2001 interview, she reflected on her release, noting that others who had been wrongfully convicted alongside her had already been freed for 3 years. Susie had spent nearly a decade in prison and shared her hope that her children would feel proud of their mother. However, not everyone supported the verdict. Bill's first wife and his daughter, Christine, believed the outcome was unjust, remaining convinced that Susie had evaded accountability for murder. After Bill's death, his first wife revealed that Susie had urgently sold off all of his belongings to secure money. This led to a fierce legal battle between Bill's first wife and Susie over his inheritance. Ultimately, no one received the life insurance payout. Susie had once planned to write a book about her struggles, but since 2002, there has been no news about her. During that time, she went to court in an attempt to reclaim Bill's insurance payout, but she ultimately lost the case. Susie's son, Wade, initially pursued a legal career but eventually left the field to provide advice to other clergymen. Interestingly, Susie, who had previously sought public attention and appeared in her husband's advertising campaigns in the 1980s, completely disappeared from public view after her failed attempt to secure the insurance funds. She did not attend the TV show in 2021 that covered her case, though her lawyer did. The lawyer described her situation as a tragedy, emphasizing that the businessman's widow had spent so many years behind bars, which had destroyed her life, while insisting he had always believed in her innocence. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Judy Southern. Sometimes, from the very beginning of an investigation, everything seems to work out. The Supreme Court might directly point to a criminal, but practice shows that they are not always correct. While they tried to connect one person to the crime, the real culprit was walking free. Judy lived in Manhattan, New York, USA. She was a young woman who worked part-time at the post office. She always focused more on family and children than on career success. However, she wanted to get an education. Therefore, after graduating from high school, she entered college and successfully graduated. During this period, she met Alan Southern. They began a relationship and then got married. Judy and Alan lived together for more than 6 years. They raised a child together. From the outside, it seemed that everything was fine in their family, until one day that destroyed the entire family idyll. On June 7, 2000, Judy was in a good mood as she went to work in the morning, delivering mail around the area. At about 3:30 p.m., she returned home and, as always, found no one there yet. Judy arrived first and was getting ready for her husband to return from work. She had a 5-year-old son who was visiting his grandparents at that time. The boy was supposed to return in the evening. Once inside, Judy immediately noticed a strange mess on the kitchen table and found a suspicious note. She remembered that no one was there when she left for work. No one from the household could have come and left a message. Her husband was at work and never showed up during the day. Judy didn't have time to figure it all out, began to read the note, which turned out to have quite disturbing content. While she scanned the piece of paper, a stranger came out of a dark room and headed towards her, weapon at the ready. Without warning, he attacked her twice. The first bullet missed, but the second hit Judy in the lower abdomen. She fell to the floor and screamed in pain, losing consciousness. When she came to her senses, the attacker was nowhere to be seen. Judy barely reached the phone and tried to call her husband for help. But the phone was not working. She wanted to get to her mobile phone but could not remember where she left it. Fearing that the stranger might still be nearby, Judy crawled to the front door and carefully opened it. She stood up, leaning against the wall, left the house. Judy tried to attract the attention of others to scare off the criminal. She was bleeding and managed to walk only a couple of meters before she fell down exhausted. She knew her husband would be finishing work soon and would be near the house. That is exactly what happened. A few minutes later, he drove up in his car and immediately noticed his wife lying on the ground near the house. Judy was covered in blood but still alive. Alan picked her up and placed her in the back seat of the car. Judy was weak but tried to tell him about the attack. She pointed to the courtyard, but her husband still didn't understand what she wanted. There was no time to figure it out. Alan realized his wife's condition could be critical. Driving towards the hospital, Alan dialed 911, informed them that he had found his wife wounded near their house and was heading to the hospital. He asked them to meet them on the way. Judy was still conscious, said that a man had attacked her. She mentioned the name like Barry several times, claiming he had set up an ambush. By the time Judy arrived at the hospital, she had already lost consciousness. Doctors urgently took her to the operating room, but she died right on the table before receiving help. Her twin sister, Trudy Smith, arrived at the medical center a few minutes later. Alan informed her about the attack. She hurried because she wanted to support her sister. However, she doesn't have enough time. When Trudy received the tragic news of her sister's death, she approached Alan and accused him of what had happened. Alan seemed embarrassed. Trudy vowed to bring him to justice. The police immediately spoke to Alan, who became the main suspect. Because, typically, the closest people are involved in such cases. From the very beginning, Alan referenced Judy's own words about the shooting and the ambush organized by a certain Barry. The problem was that he did not know a single person among her acquaintances by that name. Trudy also could not recall anyone by that name. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the crime scene and managed to find a considerable amount of evidence confirming that someone had indeed set up an ambush there and spent a significant amount of time in the house waiting for the victim. Such persistence seemed to indicate hatred, anger, and a personal motive. This only confirmed to the detectives that the criminal should be sought among the victim's immediate surroundings. Nothing was stolen from the house, so the robbery theory was immediately excluded. Mysterious Barry had taken a shower, played video games, and even found an adult toy belonging to Judy. It is not known what he did with it or why he left it in a prominent place in the bedroom. It became why Judy could not call from home for help. It was impossible because the killer had cut the phone line. He clearly wanted to deprive the victim of any chance to survive, and it worked. Doctors were sure that with timely assistance, she could have been saved. Despite the fact that the shot did not kill her immediately and she was able to leave the house, there was no one to help her. Unfortunately, she had to wait for Alan to arrive for some time, during which she lost a lot of blood. The detectives discovered traces of Alan, her husband. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the ambush. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere in the house, suggesting that the killer had smoked more than a pack of cigarettes while waiting for Judy. During the investigation, it turned out that neither the victim herself nor her husband smoked that brand of cigarettes, although this was not strong evidence of his innocence. This became the first piece of evidence in favor of Alan's alibi. It was strange that the criminal had entered the house without breaking in. Alan believed that all the windows and doors should have been closed before he left for work, but the shooter could have escaped through the window, which was wide open. During the searches, Alan remembered that his wife sometimes left the kitchen window slightly open to air out the house. This change in testimony was perceived as a very alarming sign. Spent cartridges were found at the scene of the crime. The first bullet hit a wooden wall. Flax was collected for further examination, and the police tried their best to find the weapon, but it was all in vain. Now, locating it had become a priority. It was believed that Allen managed to dispose of the gun, and naturally, he did not confess to this. Everything seemed to be against Allen. He was the first to report the incident and had spent the last minutes of Judy's life with her. His entire car was covered in blood, as were his hands and clothes. When Allen's office was searched, even more suspicious evidence was found. A special device for recording calls was installed on the family's home phone. Thanks to it, Allen could listen to their conversations while at work, checking his suspicions. This immediately drew the attention of the authorities to Allen. This became a reason to increase pressure on him. The most curious piece of evidence was a note found at the scene, which appeared to be a suicide note, but not written by Judy or her husband. A new name also surfaced in this case, Jonathan. On the other hand, Allen and Judy had serious problems, which offered more reasons to commit a crime. The recordings of telephone conversations were linked to his attempts to catch his wife in infidelity. He planned to use all of this to gain an advantage in court during their pending divorce. As it turned out, both were unfaithful in their marriage. Allen had already had 2 mistresses, which Judy knew about. These affairs significantly contributed to the collapse of their marriage. At the time of the attack, Judy also had a lover. They contacted him, but the man's name was not Jonathan, and he did not appear to look like a killer from the beginning. All suspicions were removed when he provided a reliable alibi. Just 2 days before her death, Judy had called and complained about problems in the marriage, mentioning that they were even sleeping in different rooms, that for over a month, nothing had kept them together except for their 5-year-old son, Jacob. Judy had long wanted to file for divorce but saw how well her child was with his father and did not want to ruin that bond. Allen truly played a significant role in Jacob's life. However, this no longer mattered against the backdrop of constant quarrels. Judy could no longer tolerate the conflicts and was planning to file for divorce. It is obvious that this gave Allen more reasons for anger. He could have been jealous of her, fearing that he would lose his son or be forced to share custody or pay alimony. Trudy confirmed that they indeed had disputes about their child, and both wanted to obtain custody rights, making the divorce process expectedly difficult. Trudy, too, had reason to confront Allen with accusations right in the medical center. However, the most compelling and disturbing arguments for the investigation came from Judy's friends. Everyone knew that Judy had serious marital problems, but the situation was worse than it seemed. Judy had repeatedly stated that if something happened to her, Allen would definitely be guilty. The possibility of financial motives for the crime also emerged. As their relationship began to crumble, Allen could solve all his problems at once and gain some benefit. This turned out to be true because a life insurance policy for Judy was found during the investigation, with her husband and son as the beneficiaries. Of course, Allen denied everything. He was interrogated for hours, but he insisted that under no circumstances would he kill the mother of his child. He claimed that he loved his son too much to deprive him of the most valuable person in his son's life. According to the investigation, there was not enough evidence to bring charges. More material evidence was needed. At a minimum, it was necessary to wait for the results of all the examinations. Contrary to the detective's expectations, doubts about the correctness of the choice of the main suspect arose with the first reports. The note found in the courtyard of the Southern house, identified as a suicide note, was signed by a certain Jonathan. However, the handwriting was not very legible, and the note itself was slightly contaminated with the blood of Judy. Complicating matters, it was clear that the note was addressed to a woman named Melanie and the letter was addressed to my wife, Melanie. At first, this confusion deepened because Melanie Southern did not exist, but there were other details in the letter, including an address that matched with Melanie Binney. This young woman lived at the location indicated in the note. She had a daughter and a husband named Jonathan Binney. The Binney family home was located approximately 5 kilometers from the ambush site where Judy was found. When the police checked Jonathan Binney in their database, it turned out that he fit the profile of the killer, as he had previously encountered problems with the law. Until recently, Jonathan had committed only minor offenses, but he was now under investigation for something far more serious. Shortly before Judy's death, he had abused his 3-month-old daughter. Initially, detectives believed that this note could have been written by Alan to mislead them and remove suspicion from himself. However, this clue needed proper analysis. In the suicide letter, Jonathan indicated that he wanted to leave this life voluntarily because he could not imagine being imprisoned for abusing a child. This all appeared suspicious when the detectives arrived at his house, where they found only his wife, Melanie. She admitted that he had not lived there since her statement about the child abuse case. Melanie was very angry with Jonathan. When she found out what happened to the Southern family, she was shocked because, in her opinion, Jonathan did not look like a killer, although she was no longer sure of anything. She was amazed at how close she had let a true madman, capable of such atrocities, into her life. She told the police where Jonathan could be, and the detectives arrived at the specified address. But even there, the suspect could not be found. Investigators contacted his close friends, but they also did not know where he could be. In the media, an alert was issued that a dangerous criminal was on the run, and they believed he could not have gone far. Additionally, considering the suicide note, they expected to find his lifeless body sooner. Tracking him down, the police used K-9 units with specially trained dogs and aerial support from police helicopters. The search took nearly a day until finally the dogs led the police to the basement of a house. There, Jonathan was found lying on the floor, shirtless, with 6 nicotine patches stuck to his chest. He was alive. The man told the police that he had attempted to take his own life by overdosing on nicotine. This was probably meant to convince everyone that he felt remorseful. Jonathan did not resist when he was arrested. He even seemed a little glad that it was all finally over. At the time of the crime, Jonathan Binney was 26 years old. His behavior raised doubts about his mental stability. Some suspected he might have mental issues. However, a psychiatric examination indicated that he was aware of his actions both during and after the crime. This led investigators to suspect that he was merely trying to elicit sympathy with his threats. Melanie provided detectives with writing samples that were analyzed by a handwriting expert. The expert found several significant characteristics that distinguished Jonathan's handwriting. He noted the similarity in the spelling of the lowercase g and f in the suicide note and in the samples. According to the analysis, there was almost a 100% probability that this letter was written by Jonathan himself. After this conclusion, the case against Alan began to collapse. Prior to Jonathan's arrest, the police had offered Alan a polygraph test. He agreed and passed with flying colors, which should have strengthened their confidence in his innocence, but they did not want to let him go. Alan was kept under suspicion until Jonathan confessed to attacking Judy, making it clear that Alan had no involvement in the crime. Alan was subsequently released. Another key piece of evidence was the DNA found on the toy in the house. The expert used dozens of filters to collect particles of saliva and skin from the killer, which also matched Jonathan's profile. This linked him to the crime scene. The day before Jonathan was arrested, the police found a 9mm handgun, a significant discovery. Despite a thorough search, they did not find this 9mm handgun registered to Alan. The gun was later confiscated and examined, but ballistics tests showed that it was not the weapon used to kill Judy. However, a dog team found another gun of the appropriate caliber in the woods near the house. Ballistics experts were now able to compare the bullets, cartridges, and guns. Tests were conducted. The markings on the bullets were then compared to objects from the scene of the massacre. The tests allowed investigators to prove that Judy was shot with this pistol. Fingerprints were found on the handle of the pistol, which also led to the arrest of a child abuser, Jonathan. During the search of Jonathan's house, police managed to find 9mm Cobra cartridges for a concealed carry pistol on the body under his clothing, as well as other evidence. All this confirmed that Jonathan was the weapon's owner. Melanie also told the police that he always carried a weapon with him, which he bought for self-defense. However, this had little effect on the situation with Alan. Even after that, he still looked suspicious. There were too many doubts against him because of the existing motive. Therefore, his status changed, It was now believed that he did not kill his wife with his own hands but became the mastermind behind the murder, using Jonathan as the executor. However, he refused to admit he didn't even know Jonathan. The theory that Alan hired Jonathan to kill his wife was also carefully investigated for a long time. The correspondence and calls were analyzed, but no connection leading Judy to Jonathan could be found. It seemed they were not acquainted at all. Against this backdrop, authorities tried to find at least some connection between the criminal and his victim in order to understand the motive for the attack. For a long time, it was thought this would help uncover Alan's involvement in the crime. It seemed suspicious that Judy called out a similar name before her death. Perhaps she really knew him or was trying to say something else, but her husband did not hear. The closest tie the police found was the period when Jonathan worked as a security guard at the library, where Judy occasionally borrowed books. They both had membership cards for the institution and exchanged pleasantries with each other. However, when questioned, the employees of the library could not remember any incidents involving Jonathan. The staff described Jonathan as a somewhat strange young man. While he worked as a security guard, he had no problems in his service record, at least none were known at his workplace. In fact, during this period, Jonathan had only minor offenses. When they questioned him about his job at the library, he could not recall anything that might connect him to Judy. Eventually, the detectives were forced to admit that this murder was a spontaneous act of aggression against an unknown person and a coincidence with Alan. All suspicions against Alan were dismissed. Jonathan was not familiar with Judy Southern, the choice of victim was random. He was merely driving around the city on his moped, looking for a suitable house to ambush. The Southern house seemed ideal to him, primarily because he spotted an open window that allowed for easy entry. Once inside the house, Jonathan clearly envisioned his actions. He had no specific target and was prepared to shoot whomever entered first, aiming to harm an innocent person. He smoked to ease his nerves. When it became he'd have to wait, he played video games and rummaged through the rooms. He never commented on Judy's abandoned adult toy. When Jonathan discovered that Judy had a husband and a 5-year-old son at the time, he claimed he would have shot any of them without discrimination or hesitation, even a child, if they had entered the house. Jonathan also confessed to abusing a 3-month-old child. Due to the ongoing investigation, he later told the authorities that he did not want to go to jail for child abuse, especially considering the familial ties and age of the victim. He was aware of how badly prisoners with such convictions were treated and described in detail the suffering caused by his fear of incarceration. Therefore, he sought a way to remedy the situation. Jonathan decided to go to jail as a murderer. He likely did not realize that he would be tried for both crimes and face 2 sentences, making it impossible to entirely hide his dark past. While in the ambush house, Jonathan altered his plan and decided to take his own life after committing the murder, so he didn't particularly care about leaving evidence. With these thoughts, he even wrote a suicide note. He spent several days behind bars and eventually told the police, without waiting for his lawyer, that he wanted to officially plead guilty to Judy's murder. Jonathan was not planning to deny his guilt regarding the abuse of a 3-month-old. His conscience was eating away at him, and he was ready to talk to detectives again. The entire local community was shocked by what had happened, especially Melanie, who had already suffered greatly. The media eagerly reported that a 3-month-old baby had been abused by her own father. Authorities feared public unrest and felt compelled to provide increased protection for the criminal. When Melanie learned that her husband was willing to kill any person, even a child, to avoid jail time for his shameful crime, she desperately wanted him imprisoned forever, or better yet, sentenced to death, so that this bloody chaos would end as soon as possible. Given the evidence collected, even without a confession, Jonathan Binney faced little chance of receiving a lenient sentence. He was found guilty of murdering Judy Southern and abusing a baby, receiving the highest punishment before being placed on death row. The court's decision elicited strong reactions from both the killer's wife and the family of the deceased, who finally breathed a sigh of relief and continued to raise their children. Jonathan's lawyer fought for a temporary reprieve, even managing to secure one at first, and subsequently signed a written agreement with the authorities stating that he would never again appeal the sentence if the death penalty were commuted to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. This agreement worked. Jonathan Binney is now serving a life sentence and remains behind bars. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Pamela Vitale. Pamela Vitale was born on January 11, 1953, at Shepherd Field Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, to U.S. Air Force Sergeant Vern B. Ludke, an accomplished pianist, and Carol J. Crowley Ludke, a vocalist and artist. Pamela spent most of her life in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her family, including her sister Tamara. In her later years, Pamela worked as a flight attendant and visited various countries around the world. She met her first husband, Mario Vitale, in London, and then moved in with him. They had 2 children, Mario A. Vitale and Marissa A. Vitale. Despite appearances, their relationship was not the best from the very beginning. When it began to collapse, Pamela decided to return to the United States, taking her 2 children with her. In 1978, she moved to California in search of a better life. As a single mother, she could no longer work as a flight attendant for obvious reasons, so she tried her hand in various fields of activity. She worked as an accountant, a salesperson in a fashion boutique, and a manager in a computer company, but felt that none of these jobs were right for her. Nevertheless, Pamela continued to work to provide for herself and her children while also attending film school at the University of California. This path became more successful. Pamela enjoyed realizing herself in cinema, and eventually, she became a producer. Pamela's career took off during her 3rd year of film school when she met her future second husband, Daniel Horowitz, who was a lawyer. He was a professional in his field, combining private practice with creative writing. Daniel wrote a script and saw great potential in it. He began looking for a producer who might be interested in his vision. His friend Tamara found out about the script and introduced them. Pamela became interested in the script, and thus a romance blossomed. A month later, she moved closer to him, and they began working together. Daniel and Pamela prospered financially. Thanks to Daniel's advocacy work, he gained popularity, which brought him many famous and wealthy clients. He frequently commented on high-profile criminal cases on television, even weighing in on the Michael Jackson case. Their inner circle knew Daniel and Pamela as happy people who sincerely loved each other, got along well. They seemed not just like spouses but also like best friends who understood each other perfectly. They had a bright future ahead of them. The next step they decided to take was to buy a big house together, unaware of how tragically their happiness could end. Around 6 p.m. on October 15, 2005, Daniel returned home after work. At that time, they lived in a prestigious area of a small town located approximately 30 kilometers from the city. Daniel had recently acquired a plot of land and moved in with his wife, while her children had already grown up and were living separately. Though they were a wealthy couple, they were living in a trailer because their dream home was still under construction. They were so close to realizing this dream that they were willing to endure any inconvenience. When Daniel returned home, he immediately noticed something odd. Pamela's car was near the trailer, although she should still have been at dance class. He initially brushed it off, thinking she had simply returned home early. Daniel took 2 bags of groceries and approached the trailer door, but froze in place as he saw a large stain of blood on the ground. His heart raced, but he tried to shake the thought away. However, when he opened the door and went inside, he found his wife on the floor in a fetal position, covered in blood. Daniel knew how to provide first aid, so he leaned over her body to turn her over. In that moment, he realized she was dead. She was cold to the touch and clearly had died several hours prior. Rigor mortis had already set in. He called emergency services and reported the incident. After hanging up, he leaned over his wife's body again and screamed so loudly that neighbors all over the area heard his heartbreaking cries. On the morning of the tragedy, apparently, someone had come in early that morning. Pamela opened the door, which led to an altercation. She managed to push a large TV toward her attacker, probably trying to defend herself, leaving traces of her bloody hands on it. Pamela desperately fought for her life. A mix of her blood and the attacker's was found on the floor. Particles of skin from the murderer were found under her fingernails. Despite her desperate resistance, Pamela was brutally beaten to death. The forensic examination revealed that Pamela had a broken nose and several knocked-out teeth. She was killed by blunt force trauma to the head, which caused massive hemorrhaging in her brain. The attack was so brutal that portions of her scalp were torn off, and there were fractures on her skull. The attackers even inflicted wounds on her stomach and left a symbol on her back that looked like the letter H. It appeared that the attacker had spent considerable time in the trailer with Pamela. The detectives discovered that someone had taken the water and bathed, leaving behind smeared blood. It was possible that some of the cuts on Pamela were inflicted after her death. Naturally, detectives first suspected Daniel himself, as this crime was committed with extreme cruelty. In such cases, it is often found that the guilty party is a close person with a motive. In any case, Daniel had a reliable alibi. Several people could vouch for him that day. It was a usual day for a lawyer. He left the house around 8 a.m. and did not return until 6 p.m. The high-profile murder of a famous female producer attracted wide media attention, and this case was actively covered on television. Numerous rumors immediately began to circulate. It was about a prosperous, developing area with wealthy residents, where such a massacre of an innocent person was least expected. The local community wanted to know the truth before the next attack happened. It was necessary to stop the bloodthirsty criminal. Pamela was found in her underwear. Here were no traces of a break-in, which confirmed their suspicions. Only a husband or lover came to mind. There was no evidence of abuse, and nothing was missing from the trailer, despite the fact that the wealthy couple had a lot of valuables inside. This meant that theories involving abuse or robbery were unlikely. Nevertheless, even after the alibi was confirmed, the rumors did not stop. Some speculated that Daniel could not have committed the crime himself. As a lawyer, he constantly communicated with potentially dangerous people who could easily have carried out something similar at his behest. Detectives carefully checked this theory, analyzing the data on his computer and phone. However, they found no grounds for suspicion against Daniel and could not confirm that Pamela had a lover. Nevertheless, law enforcement officials did not abandon the idea that the criminal must have been well acquainted with Pamela. He was probably a resident of the area. This theory was not without foundation, as a statement was found in a trailer indicating harassment. According to Daniel, they had been persecuted for quite some time. As a result, he even left a restraining order against one of their neighbors to Pamela, but he never filed the documents with the court. Daniel admitted that there had been difficulties with one local resident who did not like them. However, he managed to reach an agreement with this person after weeks of bickering, and the problems ended without filing a complaint. He kept the restraining order just in case something happened again. The check on this neighbor yielded no results, as he was away at the time of the attack and had a reliable alibi. He was subsequently excluded from the list of suspects. On the day Pamela was buried, a press conference was held, during which the police announced the arrest of the probable killer. It turned out to be a 16-year-old teenager named Scott Dileski, who was just 2 weeks away from his 17th birthday. He did not personally know Pamela's family, but the victim's husband, Daniel, had helped his mother, Esther Fielding, with paperwork. Scott's family was experiencing financial difficulties, so Daniel did not even take money for his assistance. This was the unexpected price for his kindness. Scott Dileski was born in San Francisco. Soon after his birth, his parents divorced, and Esther raised the boy. Quite quickly, she found a new partner and remarried. Scott claimed that his stepfather could be cruel, but his mother had never witnessed any such incidents. Information about the early years of his life is contradictory. Some claim his stepfather could indeed be cruel, while others deny it. There is also conflicting information about the mother's attitude towards her son. Despite the difficulties with the family, when his father offered for him to move in, Scott refused. Shortly before Pamela's murder, Esther got divorced again, leading to financial problems and an acute housing crisis. She and her son were left without a place to stay, and Esther desperately sought employment. But finding a job while dealing with housing issues proved difficult. Fortunately, friends extended a helping hand, offering to temporarily move in with them. Esther and Scott were offered to settle on a property in a trailer. In fact, the living conditions were modest, but they had no choice. During this period, Scott was going through a transitional phase, showing signs of rebelliousness. As a pleasant but peculiar young man, he had previously been a Boy Scout and a baseball player. Before moving, he had studied quite well. Coincidentally, a chain of tragic events had been triggered by the loss of a loved one. Shortly before the move, Scott's half-sister died in a car accident. This serious incident caused significant psychological distress for him. Many believe that his mother's indifference led to negative changes in his behavior, but she did not remain idle. She tried to support her family during that time. Scott became increasingly detached from society and closed off, exhibiting low energy. His behavior also took on some strange characteristics. For instance, he once drew a pentagram and danced around it. This was only an external manifestation of his problems, while those who constantly interacted with Scott did not notice any significant alarming changes in his behavior. He became increasingly immersed in dark thoughts and began to write disturbing poems, probably to attract his mother's attention. Esther was sure that her son simply exhibited quirks. She did not speak of him as a difficult child. She believed that Scott was going through a challenging period in his own way due to the death of his sister and the financial difficulties their family faced. Esther remembered how he previously could not even stand the sight of blood, but when the police first spoke to him, he claimed that at the age of 12, he had tried various illegal substances. Gradually, Scott showed an increasing interest in crime. He read a lot about serial killers and school shootings, spoke more often about these topics, showing an unhealthy fascination. Friends noticed that he was becoming increasingly distant. When detectives looked at Scott's computer, even more questions arose. They found very disturbing content, particularly concerning the practice of cutting up animals. One of Scott's friends, whom he met after the move, said that not long before Pamela's murder, they had decided to sell a truck, viewing it as the only way to improve their lives financially. The teenagers needed money. A solution was found quickly. They lived in a wealthy area, so they decided to put in some effort to earn the necessary amount. Scott, whose demeanor was becoming increasingly gloomy, decided to take the path of crime and rob a house, launching another chain of alarming events. Shortly before Pamela's death, a woman named Karen contacted the police, noting that a purchase she did not make had been charged to her credit card. An order from an online store was delivered to a nearby house where Esther and Scott lived. Someone from this household had purchased special lighting equipment for growing illegal plants. All of this led to Esther, as it was under her name that the suspicious order was made. However, Karen did not want to contact the police immediately. Esther was outraged by what she perceived as slander and believed that they were trying to put her in a bad light. Esther denied that she had ordered anything similar on the internet. However, the property owners suspected something was wrong and checked Scott's computer. Under pressure, Scott quickly confessed that he had come up with a fraudulent plan involving credit cards and that he had ordered the lighting fixtures. Soon after, Pamela died. In response to this incident, the parents of Scott's accomplice pressured him to confess to the scam, fearing that the young people could be involved in much more serious offenses. Maybe, the fraud involving the credit cards led to a robbery that ended in murder. His parents insisted that the accomplice go to the police station and confess everything. Interestingly, when he left the interrogation room, the detectives had in their hands a story that Scott had killed his neighbor. The young man who testified about all of this received immunity from prosecution for providing testimony. It was he who had pushed Scott into fraud and suggested that he engage in illegal activities. When the police came to arrest Scott, he was not at home. Esther was detained and admitted that her son was at a nearby location with his girlfriend. Less than an hour later, he was arrested along with Esther, who was also considered a participant. Esther and her son were held in custody for destruction of evidence and possibly for murder. Bail for Esther was set at $500. The suspicion against her arose from the story about a backpack that contained details of accounts and numbers of people from whom Scott had stolen money or planned to steal. Several people had already suffered due to the swindler. Esther's actions were viewed as criminal. The night after Pamela's murder, she contacted Scott to inform him of police activity in their area and asked him not to come home. Scott told her about the records and the backpack containing the data, asking her to throw it away, which she did. Esther insisted she was simply afraid for her son's safety. Scott was with his girlfriend, named Jenna Reddy. She later also ended up at the station, even testified against her boyfriend at the trial. She stated that he often talked about different ways of killing, for example, that shooting a person is less painful than beating them to death with a bat or stabbing them with a knife. According to Jenna, Scott often wondered how long it takes to beat someone to death and was obsessed with this topic. After the crime against Pamela, when they pressured Esther, she quickly agreed to cooperate with the authorities, receiving guarantees for protection from criminal prosecution. She denied any connection to her neighbor's murder. However, opinions about Esther were very conflicting. Some believed that she lived for her son, while her ex-husband did not share this belief. In any case, Esther changed her testimony, clearly trying to justify herself. Mainly, Esther talked about the backpack that she had thrown away. She did not know all the contents but believed they were unrelated to the murder. There was data on all the people who had become victims of Scott's fraudulent scheme. Esther helped find some items they had tried to destroy, including shoes and gloves that had blood stains on them. An examination showed that the items contained the blood of Pamela. Scott also left a shoe imprint at the crime scene, and samples of his DNA were found on Pamela's foot. In Scott's room, handwritten notes were discovered, some of which contained information about accounts of people who were likely to have been deceived by the same fraudulent scheme. In addition, there were plans to kidnap people. Apparently, Scott was ready to make money by any means, regardless of the seriousness of the crimes. There were also descriptions of how to get rid of evidence. All this confirmed the guilt of him. There were many coincidences. Even the symbol carved on the back of Pamela resembled the signatures that Scott used. A public defender was appointed at the beginning of the trial. However, there was also strong evidence against Scott that came to court. He was the complete opposite of his Gothic image during the investigation. All this was part of the defense attorney's strategy to humanize a dangerous killer in front of the jury in order to acquit him. According to Scott's version of events told before the trial, on the day of the murder, he decided to take a walk towards a local waterfall. He returned from this walk with serious injuries. According to him, while he was walking, he accidentally met a strange woman who attacked him, resulting in his injuries. By an amazing coincidence, she was Pamela, so the blood stains on both her and his clothes matched the DNA of the victim. He claimed that she had clawed his face, cut his wrist, and injured his hand. When he was arrested, the injuries were still fresh. Naturally, his story sounded unrealistic. Why would Pamela attack Scott at the waterfall? What happened to her afterward? How she ended up in the house? And who attacked her were all major questions. The evidence against Scott included all his browser queries related to animal cruelty, his obsession with crimes, plans for murder, material evidence, blood on items, confessions from friends of his girlfriend and her mother. The lawyer tried to highlight his best qualities and described him as a decent guy, but against the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecutor's office, it seemed futile. The only point that might have raised doubt, as stated by the lawyer, was the discovery of DNA samples. In addition to Scott's and Pamela's blood, traces of an unidentified person were found in the house. The defense attorney insisted that the detectives overlooked this evidence from the start and focused solely on proving Scott's guilt. The prosecution argued that the evidence against Scott was too substantial to be dismissed, while the evidence suggesting Scott's innocence was virtually insignificant. The jury went into deliberation to decide Scott's fate. It took them 18 hours to reach a decision, ultimately sparing him from the death penalty, as they chose to try him as a minor. It was assumed that he would serve the rest of his life in prison. Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder a month before the final round of hearings was held. Pamela's husband took the stand and stated that in his many years as a lawyer, He had represented at least 50 different murderers but had never seen a total lack of remorse like Scott's. Daniel believed that Scott had no redeeming qualities that would allow for parole eligibility. He deserved to be in prison for the rest of his life, and so it happened. Scott Dileski was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was to remain in a juvenile facility until he turned 18 and then be transferred to an adult prison. Immediately after Scott turned 18, he appealed to have his sentence reviewed, but his efforts were in vain. In 2009, Scott filed a claim that his rights had been violated. He wanted to change the venue of the hearing and claimed that some evidence which could refute the appeal was also rejected. The next attempt was made in 2011, where he pointed to evidence indicating the involvement of an unknown person in the murder, specifically claiming that the authorities did not even attempt to identify who owned all the DNA traces found in the trailer where Pamela died. He insisted that the nature of the crime indicated a personal motive. Scott himself allegedly did not know Pamela, and it made no sense for him to kill her, especially with such cruelty. Additionally, the detectives claimed that the criminal remained in the trailer for an extended period, consistent with the timeline, but Scott asserted that he had been at home during that time. Again, his arguments did not lead to any significant changes. Another appeal was filed in 2016, with Scott insisting that his life sentence was wrongful because he was a minor at the time of the crime. The appeal was accepted for consideration. During his imprisonment, state laws were revised to prohibit life sentences for minors without the possibility of parole, and he was automatically given the opportunity for early release after serving 25 years in prison. In 2030, Scott will have the chance to present his case for release. However, whether this release will be approved by the Commission remains uncertain. It is difficult to predict the outcome, but it is known that Scott became an exemplary prisoner. He did not drop out of school and continued to receive an education within the prison walls. Pamela's family stated that they would definitely be present at the parole board hearing to prevent him from being released, viewing him as an especially dangerous criminal. Daniel never finished building the house he dreamed of with his wife. He was forced to sell the land along with the partially built house because he simply wanted to forget everything that had happened and start life anew.